Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The morning mist clung to the Appalachian ridges like ghostly fingers, slowly retreating as the sun climbed higher into the Virginia sky. Jake adjusted the weight of his backpack and gazed out over the rolling green valleys below, where scattered farmhouses dotted the landscape like tiny toys. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers that made every breath feel like a small blessing. He pulled the large iron pot from the camp stove and prepared coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him in the moment. As he held the steaming mug in his hands, Emma turned their conversation toward dreams and possibilities. "You know that guy Mark from the other hiking group? The tall one," she said, settling onto a fallen log. "I was late for the morning briefing yesterday and had to sit next to him. We got to talking, and it turns out he's from around these parts." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "He told me about this amazing waterfall nearby. I've been dreaming about seeing it ever since." Jake was about to steer the conversation elsewhere when Ryan interrupted. Ryan had a talent for attracting trouble, like a magnet draws iron filings, and Jake could see that familiar glint in his eyes. "A waterfall. You heard about this place before, Jake?" Ryan asked, leaning forward with interest. "Yeah, sure," Jake replied reluctantly. "If we backtrack to Old Mill Road and take a small detour, maybe just a couple miles, I think we can still catch our train. That's assuming we move fast, though." Within an hour, they stood at a crossroads. Jake frowned, hoping these two adventure seekers would change their minds at the last minute. But the spark had already ignited in Emma's eyes, and he knew resistance was futile. The barely visible dirt road they turned onto hadn't seen traffic in decades. Its edges were still discernible despite the fact that pine trees of varying heights occasionally grew right in the center or along the sides. Every detail suggested that aside from them, no one had been here for a very long time. They walked in silence for a while until Emma broke the quiet. "Doesn't this road seem a little creepy to you? It's way too quiet here." "It's just a normal road," Ryan laughed. "Actually, I read on some forum that a group of 3 hikers disappeared on the way to this waterfall back in the 90s. Is that true, or are you trying to scare me?" Emma asked. Ryan smiled mysteriously and said nothing. The road they'd been following for over 40 minutes suddenly split in two, and neither path showed the faded blue trail markers they'd been following. Ryan pulled out his GPS and stared at it for a long time before cursing under his breath. "Damn, this definitely shouldn't be here, but I think we need to take the upper road." No one objected, and they trudged wearily up the indicated path, each lost in their own thoughts. The wide road gradually narrowed to a trail. Then the trail disappeared somewhere in the thick grass, and soon they were pushing through patches of stinging nettle, and then various thickets until they were completely lost, with no idea how to get back. Ryan walked ahead, clearing the path. He kept offering Emma his hand, and she would smile shyly in response. Jake just shot them irritated glances. "What are we going to do?" "It'll be dark in a few hours," Jake said. What do you suggest? Do you know how to get back to the road? We wouldn't have left it if it weren't for you. Jake couldn't contain his emotions. Did you already forget who came up with the idea to take this route? Ryan shot back. Yeah, but I didn't insist back then. Go to hell, you idiot. Jake was seething, his face flushed with anger. There are always problems because of you. Emma intervened, trying to end the argument. Jake, calm down. We'll figure something out. Watch out here, Ryan warned, pushing through a pile of branches covered in blackberry vines, but it was too late. Emma stumbled, her foot slipping between two logs. She quickly pulled it out, but held onto her ankle, groaning in pain. Did you break anything? Ryan asked worriedly, supporting her by the shoulder. She grimaced and nodded. It'll heal before the wedding, she tried to joke, but when she attempted to walk, she limped heavily, and it was obvious that each step was difficult for her. The heat began to give way to evening coolness, and the road that didn't exist began to be covered by fog that gradually turned into dusk. They had to make camp in the darkness by flashlight. Jake lay in his tent, wrapped in his sleeping bag. Despite his exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. The stupid situation they'd gotten into bothered him, and so did Emma. Why did she always take Ryan's side? If it hadn't been for an urgent need to step outside, the whole swarm of anxious thoughts would have spun in his head, possibly, until dawn. He walked a few dozen yards into the woods, and when he was heading back, he heard rustling in the absolute silence. Jake froze, listening. Somewhere very close by, a wolf howled loudly and prolongedly, filling the entire forest with that sound. He turned toward where the sound came from and saw in the distance a dark figure dressed in something like a long medieval cloak with a hood. Or maybe it was just an ordinary raincoat, and his imagination was simply painting something mystical. It was too dark to determine from such a distance whether it was a man or woman. Opposite the figure stood a wolf, and they looked at each other for some time. This sight was simultaneously frightening and mesmerizing. The figure reached under the cloak as if taking something out, then slowly bent down to the wolf, and opening their palm, blew something on it that looked like dust, which rose in a small grayish cloud. The wolf tried to howl, but it sounded more like pitiful dog whimpering. Jake heard rustling behind him and was distracted for a moment. When he looked back in that direction, he saw only the night forest. The morning sun had already begun to fill the clearing with warm air when Jake opened his eyes. He could hear bright, girlish laughter in his palms. Emma was packing her things into her backpack, and Ryan was spinning around. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, and dimples appeared on her cheeks from her smile. Jake felt his jaw muscles involuntarily clench. Breakfast was modest, cookies and a few sips of tea from the water remaining at the bottom of the bottle. Then came a long, exhausting journey through the mighty coniferous forest, which by closer to noon no longer provided the desired coolness. The midday heat and unnatural silence affected Jake like a sleeping pill, and at the same time, something ominous. Peering into the green ocean of forest, his eyes noticed some large, dark spot. Taking a few steps forward, he startled a whole bunch of thick carrion flies that buzzed loudly and scattered in different directions. Ah, how disgusting! Emma barely suppressed her gag reflex. It stinks terribly. Is that a wolf? Yeah, I think so. It died recently because the smell isn't too strong. I doubt it's fresh. Look how bony it is, like a disgusting dried-up scarecrow. Have you seen many wolf corpses with your own eyes? It's just old and possibly sick. That's all. Let's get out of here." Jake walked slowly ahead, and from time to time he adjusted the heavy straps of his backpack, which from the weight and sweat had begun to chafe his shoulders. His hand automatically reached for the back pocket of his pants for his phone, once again checking if there was any signal. At least one bar. "Well, what's the deal with Hope?" Emma asked. Although she and Ryan had made her an improvised bandage yesterday and taken some of her things, she walked too slowly, trying not to lean on her injured leg. "Still no signal," Jake said sadly, turning off his old phone to save battery. "What does the GPS say?" she asked, looking at Ryan. He carefully wiped his glasses and thoughtfully frowned. "I don't even know what to say. It's not showing anything. Some kind of anomaly. But some time ago, I started noticing something like blue markings on trees." "So you're saying we've returned to the place we came from?" "Not necessarily. It's like that road, but it's several dozen miles long, and we could be at any point on it," Ryan said, after which silence fell. Strong thirst made itself known. His mouth was dry, and the last water had been drunk that morning. Jake walked along, mentally recalling the desert. It seemed like just a little more, and he'd start seeing mirages. Unexpectedly, he noticed a gray slate roof that showed through between the sprawling pine branches. At first it seemed to him that he was hallucinating, but no. In a small clearing completely overgrown with tall grass stood a neat wooden house. "Oh, this is just a jackpot," he heard Ryan's joyful voice behind him. "There should be a spring or stream near the house. If we're lucky, maybe even people." "Well, it seems like there are definitely no people here," Emma said, stopping. She was resting, leaning on a stick she'd found somewhere in the forest. "Look, the grass isn't even trampled, and if someone lived here, there would be some kind of path. Maybe the house isn't locked, and we can at least spend the night there properly. And if it is locked, then what? Dude, we're not going to break into someone else's house. We're not some kind of thugs." Jake fell silent. After walking a few dozen yards, he blinked in amazement and saw what was hidden behind the tall grass and forest. A small, clear lake surrounded by towering pines several dozen yards high. One of them, the one that grew closer to the house, had fallen into the water, reaching almost to the middle of the lake with its top. The massive tangled roots protruded from the ground in a considerable hill covered with green moss. While Jake looked at the lake as if spellbound, Emma was already limping across the creaky boards on the porch. "It's not locked," Ryan rejoiced, pushing the heavy doors inward. "I still think someone's here," the girl said tensely, holding in her hands one of the bunches of dried flowers hanging under the ceiling on rusty nails. "Look what we have here. Thyme, St. John's wort yarrow. And these I don't know, but strangely, they're still fresh, collected recently." This place generally evoked an elusive but slightly alarming feeling. Jake didn't want to cross the threshold of the old house, but common sense suggested that the sun, which was still shining brightly, would quickly be replaced by dusk. Lost came a pleasant female voice that materialized out of thin air somewhere behind Jake. Yes, we're here." He tried to find words, but at the sight of the woman, it was as if everything mixed up in his head. He caught himself thinking that he expected to see anyone here. Weathered shepherds, maybe an ancient grandmother, but definitely not a young woman who would be alone in the forest. She was dressed in black, attractive, with green eyes. Beautiful tattoos on her arms caught the eye. Her neck was adorned with a pendant with black agate that hung neatly on a leather cord. "Will you eat?" she offered kindly. "Yes, we won't refuse," Emma rejoiced. "We got a little lost yesterday." "I understand, but you won't make it to the village today," the woman said, looking at Emma's injured leg. "Does it hurt?" "Well, yes, a little. Do you have any painkillers?" Emma's eyes lit up with a joyful spark, but the woman continued. "Well, I mean tea in a thermos. It's herbal." "Aren't you afraid here alone in the forest?" Ryan asked, sitting down at a table covered with worn oilcloth. "Aren't you afraid of wild animals?" "I'm more afraid of people," the woman said thoughtfully. "I moved here from the city a few years ago. Got tired of living monotonously, home to work, work to home. And in the mountains, it's different. This house was built by my great-grandfather. I decided to live here for a few weeks on vacation and just stayed. Now I look after everything here." She unhurriedly laid out plates with fragrant mushroom soup in front of the tourists. Jake thanked her and ate silently, while Ryan couldn't calm down with questions. "And this road, where does it lead? I suppose in Soviet times they transported timber here." "Yes, they did, but my grandfather didn't like it, destroyed his forest." "And why did everyone abandon it? Did this business become unprofitable?" "They cut down everything they could." "Not quite," the woman said thoughtfully, as if choosing her words. "Various accidents just started happening. Sometimes a truck's brakes would fail, and it would speed off a slippery, swampy road into a ravine. Sometimes a tree would fall during a storm and crush some poor soul, or people would just disappear. Different things happened. Even people just got sick. The locals here are very superstitious, and when 5 people died in the forest in 6 months, they refused to work at the logging site. "Can we spend the night with you? My leg is starting to hurt more, and I'm just not able to walk far today," Emma interrupted the story. "Yes, of course," the woman agreed, "but you'll have to manage on your own. I have some business in the village. Products are running out, and tomorrow the store will be open. I need to get down before it gets dark. I thought there was civilization here, and supermarkets everywhere. There are, but they're far from here, and it's hard to carry a full backpack. And the nearest store doesn't work every day." After cleaning the dishes, the woman quickly packed a small backpack and was already standing by the door when she hesitated slightly. "Almost forgot, don't leave the house at night, and I don't recommend swimming in the lake." "Why? Is the water cold?" "Wolves," the woman replied, creaking shut the heavy doors behind her. She looked like she could see into water. Dusk descended on the forest suddenly, but despite the fatigue, there was no desire to sleep at all. Jake sat at the table and watched as Emma, turning on her flashlight, slowly spread her sleeping bag on the only bed in the house. He and Ryan would sleep in the corner tonight on inflatable mats, with comfort almost like in a hotel. "Look what I found," Ryan said, creaking a half-liter plastic bottle with dark liquid in his hands. "Cognac. Completely forgot about it." "Oh, I wouldn't refuse," Emma perked up. Ryan confidently searched the wooden shelves overflowing with various junk, such as small jars with strange dried roots or mushrooms, some copper dishes of unknown purpose, and in a minute handed them each a small shot glass with brown liquid. The room filled with a pleasant almond aroma. Jake, slightly shaking his hand, watched as the drink slowly flowed down the walls of the bottle. "What a pleasant warm night," Emma said thoughtfully, taking a small sip. She continued, "I don't even want to return to the city tomorrow, despite all these adventures." "It's always like that in the mountains," Jake said absent-mindedly, watching Ryan move a little closer to Emma. "Yeah, this is already starting to annoy me a bit. By the way, maybe we should go look at the lake. And I already know what I'll wish for." "The hostess asked us not to go out at night," Ryan reminded sternly. "Don't be such a bore," Jake laughed. "Didn't she seem strange to you?" "No," Ryan said uncertainly, hesitating a little. "Well, just think about it. She said there are wolves here, but she went alone into the forest at night. She's local, knows every trail. And she looks like a real witch. Don't talk nonsense." "Maybe he's right. Just look around. The house itself and these things in it. What are these dried herbs worth? Or, for example, the absence of icons? You saw that in the mountains live devout people. But she said herself that she came here from the city. By the way, when I first entered the house, I noticed that strange toy on the shelf. I wanted to examine it, but it was somehow awkward with the hostess around." She looked at Ryan. "Could you get it?" The doll was indeed strange. Woven from small dark twigs, the head wrapped with black woolen threads like a Matanka doll. But that was the only thing that united them, because this one exuded something frankly eerie. "Maybe it's better not to touch it." "I've never seen anything like this in my life," the girl insisted. He reached for the top shelf, but Jake tried to get the doll first. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was just senseless manifestations of jealousy. He caught a wooden box that stood on the shelf, and it fell with a thud, hitting the floor. Ryan just froze in surprise, holding the doll in his hands, and Emma, forgetting about everything, bent curiously over the box. "Are you going to rummage through her things, dude? How else? I'll put everything back as it was." Jake carefully took an old book in a leather binding in his hand. It was written in a language unknown to him, possibly even Romanian, so he quickly lost interest. Then his attention was completely captured by a small linen bag, clearly sewn by hand, filled with something small, like flour. He slowly untied it. Inside was something white, like powder. "Is this what I think it is?" Ryan asked, clearly hinting at illegal substances. "There's a border nearby. Maybe the hostess is involved in smuggling." "Oh, don't be silly. It smells like rotten eggs or some other nastiness." Ryan leaned closer. He tried the powder on his tongue and grimaced. Emma was also interested, but bending over the bag, she suddenly sneezed, inadvertently scattering the unknown substance around so that part of it spilled. "Damn, now I'm covered in this crap," Ryan said sadly. Emma, to make up for her mistake, began carefully brushing the white dust from his hair and clothes. She took the bag, and tying it up, put it back in the box with other things. "I think we'd better put everything back as it was, especially since we didn't really find anything here." Jake, on the contrary, thought they had found evidence, but he didn't argue and just watched Ryan slowly collect the things scattered on the floor. Suddenly, his gaze caught something red. At first, he thought he was just imagining it, but looking closer, he saw drops of blood glistening on the dusty floor. Emma noticed it too. She was scared at first, then pulled a tissue from her pocket and handed it to Ryan. He pressed it to his nose, and in a moment it was covered in crimson stains. "Dude, does this happen to you often?" Jake asked. "First time in my memory. I think you'd better wash your face with water." Emma quickly opened the door, and fresh night air hit them. Ryan slowly went outside. and although Jake tried to hold him back by the shoulder, he refused. He bent over the lake and, scooping water in his palms, splashed it on his face several times. Maybe it's because of that powder. Sounds scary. I don't think so. If it were radioactive, she wouldn't keep it just like that in a box. You're right, but I still feel somehow uneasy. I'd even swim in the lake to wash all the dust and dirt off myself, and then dry in the air. Why, I have a towel in my backpack. She quickly threw off all her clothes, leaving only her underwear, and throwing it on the shore, quickly ran into the water. Ryan was on the porch of the house, but quickly returned and joined Emma. Jake hesitated for a long time, but finally, giving in to persuasion, dove into the lake and was in its middle in a minute. The water ran like icy needles over his body, refreshing his thoughts. The unnatural silence of this place began to alarm him. The round lake, in which for some reason even the bright stars weren't reflected, now seemed like the pendant with agate that hung around the woman's neck, black as tar. And from this thought, goosebumps ran over his body. Emma and Ryan had already gotten out of the water. He took a towel and quickly threw it over Emma's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. Jake was about 10 yards away, but despite the darkness, it seemed to him that she was smiling back. He just boiled with fury. Nothing had happened, but the realization came that just one moment and all his hopes would be destroyed. He had to do something. And so, pointing his hand at a bright dot that was moving quickly across the dark sky, he shouted, "A star, a shooting star. Look there, make a wish." "So you drop dead," Ryan threw back. "So that you drop dead," Jake quietly muttered to himself. When he got out of the water, his body was already covered with goosebumps, and the night air seemed icy, but now that worried him little. Emma and Ryan had already returned to the house, so he trudged after them, lowering his eyes like a beaten dog. There was no strength left for long conversations. Everyone wrapped themselves in their sleeping bags to warm up, and sleep didn't keep them waiting long. Jake pressed the soft, synthetic filling of his sleeping bag to his ears, trying to drown out the melodious singing of chaffinches. All crumpled from yesterday, he was luxuriating in the warmth, promising himself another 30 minutes, just literally one more minute, and he would definitely wake up. Water boiled with a characteristic sound on the gas burner, disturbing the morning idyll. "Get up, lazy bones." Ryan poked a mug of coffee into his hand. "Breakfast in bed, now that's what I understand." But the smile left his face when he almost spilled the cup on himself with a start. "What the hell, you moron, who does that? For how quickly you woke up." And about the coffee, Jake softened a little here. Emma handed him cookies. "I found a few pieces on the shelf. I think the hostess won't be offended that we ate them." Jake washed down the dry cookies with coffee while simultaneously throwing things into his backpack, and had almost finished when the doors slammed. The woman had returned. Today her eyes were cold as ice. She silently scanned the house with her gaze as if she sensed something, then dryly and without emotion said, "You'd better leave." And despite the fact that Emma walked slowly, constantly stopping, they still managed to catch the regular bus, and at 10 o'clock in the evening were already at the station of their home city, confident that this adventure was over. The gray, colorless sky was covered with rain clouds. It seemed the same thing had happened to his life. Reality once again laughed at Jake when, with a stupid smile, getting off the train from Denver, he met an old acquaintance. Mark from the parallel group. "Hey, did you hear the news?" "No, I just arrived. Dropped out of life for 3 weeks. Ryan died last week." "That can't be." "See, it can. How did it happen?" "He was sick with something. The tests showed cardiac arrest, but there are different rumors going around." "Meaning?" "Well, damn, there's something unclean there, they say. He lost a lot of weight and was generally somehow twitchy. But in fact, Mark, aside from rumors, didn't tell much, and then a message came from Emma. Just 3 words: "Come, need to talk." The whole tone and unnaturalness of this message made it clear that he shouldn't expect anything good. He uncertainly pressed the doorbell and immediately pulled his hand back. Almost immediately the door opened, but instead of Emma, her mother stood in the hallway. She quietly greeted him and nodded toward the room at the end of the corridor. This path seemed endless, and when he dared to enter, he was met by the cold gaze of sunken eyes. Emma lay in bed, unable to get up, and seemed to be delirious. "And I'm next," she said quietly. "What are you talking about?" "No, you don't understand. First Ryan, now me." "Stop it, everything will be fine. You'll recover." He leaned near her bed, put his hand in her palm. "I saw him before he died, and I know everything. He started dreaming about that woman from the forest. She whispered something in his sleep, and each time he got worse. He weakened and lost weight." "Wait, what does this have to do with you?" "When Ryan died, she started coming to me, each time whispering something. It's just driving me crazy. No matter how hard I try to hear, I still can't make out what she's saying. And a few days ago, I developed a rash like he had. Look." She turned her arm, and only now Jake noticed reddish spots covered with scabbed crust on the pale skin. The wounds itched, and some of them Emma had scratched until they bled. "You just need to see a doctor. You don't understand. This won't help anymore. Ryan was our friend, but he's dead. That can't be changed. We're facing death for the first time in our lives, but it seems to me you're taking everything too close to heart." She looked skeptically straight into his eyes and quietly continued, "You'd better go. I'm tired." The conversation left an unpleasant aftertaste of doubts and fears. A few days later, a message came from the group leader. Emma had died. The funeral was tomorrow at 1 p.m. The next few weeks were in a fog. Jake seemed to live, eat, talk to someone, even attend lectures at the university, but was deadly afraid to fall asleep. That last conversation with Emma constantly surfaced in his head. Every night he repeated the same ritual. He brewed a huge cup of coffee and began scrolling through pages of various forums in search of an answer. But everything came from where he didn't expect it. Jake ran into that same Mark at the university. He shed some light on the story, or maybe, on the contrary, confused it even more. "Dude, I know those forests like the back of my hand. My grandparents are from that village. When I was little, I was left there for the whole summer. And you know what? The locals are afraid of that place like fire, especially at night. And there's no house in the forest. Maybe there was something 30 years ago, but now there aren't even ruins left. Only the lake with a big fallen tree. I saw it with my own eyes. And why do they avoid this place? Don't you know? Well, no one specifically told me about it, but I was once cleaning up my grandfather's house. I found an old newspaper, Voice of the Mountains, from somewhere in the 90s. There was an article about an incurable disease among loggers. About 3 or 4 of them died, all from cardiac arrest. And the doctors couldn't do anything. They set up a quarantine, closed the logging site, even though there were no new cases. But whether it's somehow connected to this place is hard to say. The very next day after the conversation with Mark, Jake visited a local fortune teller and spent his last money on all possible rituals for removing curses and spells. Only this helped him sleep peacefully at night. Thoughts about Emma and Ryan receded into the background, and he even began to laugh at himself somewhere deep in his soul. How could he have fallen for these superstitions? The tight, dark room was illuminated only by the bright flashes of the computer. The clock quietly chimed 2 a.m. Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyelids closing by themselves. The blinding flickering of the monitor was replaced by pleasant darkness. He rubbed his eyes with his fingers. From these touches, it began to seem that small, bright specks were breaking through the darkness. He opened his eyes, but the small spots of light became brighter. A light breeze barely noticeably touched his hair and moved to the thick crowns of pines that slowly emerged from the darkness. In the black Astar lake, the stars weren't reflected. Behind him, something creaked as if a door had opened. He desperately wanted to turn around, but fear bound his body. Then the night peace was broken by a quiet whisper. It was a chilly October morning when they set out on their way. David Martinez, his girlfriend Emma, best friend Ryan, and Ryan's girlfriend Jessica. David was a quiet loner type who was never very popular in high school. Emma was a sweet and charming girl who had quite a few friends in her social circle. And Ryan was the kind of guy who thought he was God's gift to mankind, though he did care for his friends very deeply. Jessica liked to gossip and spread rumors more than anyone else they knew. This unlikely group of friends had become closer in their college years, as none of them went out of state, while many of their other friends did. On the first weekend of the month, they had planned a camping trip to the woods near their hometown. David was the most familiar with the area, as he had been there several times as a Boy Scout on other camping trips. Ryan and Jessica weren't thrilled about being away from modern conveniences, but spending time with David and Emma was more important. When they arrived, they chose an open area surrounded by trees. It was serene and nearly silent as they began setting up their tents and the rest of their gear. They could hear birds chirping in the distance and occasionally the rustling of falling leaves. They worked well as a team. David was reading the instructions for the tents, Ryan hammered in the stakes for them, and Emma started gathering nearby wood for a fire. Jessica searched the area for cell phone reception. She lamented that all the trees must have been blocking the signal. Once the tents had all been set up, the sun was beginning to set. They made a fire within a circle of rocks, as per David's suggestion, in order to keep it contained. Emma produced marshmallows from her bag, along with graham crackers and chocolate bars. And before long, the marshmallows were impaled by skewers and roasting for s'mores to the entire group's enjoyment. Ryan stated that he was bored, and Jessica suggested that they play campfire games. They started with truth or dare, but quickly found out that it was too childish, even for the gossip queen herself. Ryan then suggested that they all tell each other ghost stories in an effort to frighten one another. He also added a drinking game component, which involved visible flinching, becoming grounds for one to down a bottle of beer from the cooler. They agreed, and each of them began thinking of what story they would tell as they finished their s'mores. Ryan decided he wanted to go first, since he was convinced his story would be the scariest. He told a modified version of the Hookman legend, which ended in the story's male protagonist punching the killer in the mouth and saving the day. Understandably, this scared no one, and as per another rule that had been set, Ryan had to drink a beer because of it. He was mad, but only because of the fact that his story failed to frighten. He was certainly no stranger to drinking beer, and it was all in good fun anyway. Emma told the tale of a college girl who had gone to stay at her roommate's house in the country over the holiday break. The weather was bad, the house was old, and there wasn't much to do. One night the girls were in the house alone, and a monster storm hit. The power went out, and they decided to go to bed. They heard the door crash open, and the girl whose family owned the house went to close it. After a few tense minutes, she came back. Her frightened roommate reached out to touch her and soon found her to be decapitated. The boys laughed it off as being ridiculous. Jessica jumped a bit at the ending reveal, so she started drinking her beer as she began to relate her story. She shared a story about a teenage babysitter asked to look after a pair of children while their parents were at a social gathering. The children had gone to bed early, and she was up watching television when she began to receive strange hang-up calls from a blocked number. After a few times, a whispering voice on the other end asked, "Have you checked on the children?" The girl began to feel threatened, so she called the police and asked them to trace the number the next time a call came. A more demanding voice accompanied the next call, ordering her to see what had happened to the children and claiming that she would be next. At first, they seemed to be sleeping safe and sound in their beds, but when she turned on the light, their throats had been slit and they were dead. At that moment, the police called back and informed her that the calls were coming from inside the house. She dropped the phone in terror and felt cold metal pressed against her throat. Ryan flinched, causing him to have to drink another beer. Emma and David both said that they had seen that in a recent movie, and it wasn't very well made. And finally, it was David's turn, and his expression turned very stern and serious. He spoke of a demon that likes to roam forests and wooded areas like the one they were camping in. The demon preys on the souls of the weak, he said, looking around at each of his friends. He once possessed a man in a car with his son and forced him to crash into a brick wall, killing him. The little boy watched his father die before his eyes and could do nothing about it. David claimed that the demon was responsible for a variety of unexplained deaths and disappearances, including another boy who went missing from Pennsylvania, and the brutal murders of a group of office employees on a camping trip of their own. He said it resembles a collection of animals molded together as one being. It has hooves for feet, a tall ape-like body, spade-shaped tail, claws like a rodent, and bat-like wings. The head of a goat and eyes like that of a snake. He concluded by saying that you could summon the demon by saying its name. And then he shouted. Malfaz, everyone jumped and subsequently had to drink a beer. They went to bed shortly thereafter, and all was quiet. Ryan got up late at night because all the beer he drank required him to relieve his bladder frequently. He went into the trees and was quickly breathing a sigh of relief. Several minutes went by, and he didn't return to his tent. Jessica had woken up and was still shaken from all the scary stories. She waited for him to come back and comfort her, and when he didn't, she knew that something was wrong. She went over to David and Emma's tent to see if they were still awake. She didn't want to disturb anyone if they were sleeping, but she was concerned about her boyfriend's safety. She took a flashlight with her and roamed the nearby woods, calling his name at about average speaking volume. Off in the trees she went until something startled her. She screamed for only a second or two before her flashlight fell to the ground, and silence enveloped the night once more. Emma heard the scream, though she asked David if she had heard it too. He said it was probably just Ryan playing a joke on her to make up for not scaring anyone before. Emma was still concerned and wanted David to check on them. He did, and quickly reported back that they weren't in their tent or in the immediate area. She insisted that they had to go look for their missing friends because she was too scared to be left alone, and they couldn't wait until morning. They grabbed their flashlights and started combing the area just beyond the fire's light. They moved out further and further, finding only more trees. They were within shouting distance of each other, but separated to cover more ground. Suddenly, Ryan's mutilated body fell from a tree in front of Emma, and she screamed in terror. David ran to her, but it was too late. She had disappeared into the darkness, leaving only her flashlight behind. He picked it up and saw Ryan's body on the ground. Hanging from a nearby tree was Jessica's body, with her throat ripped out. He stumbled back to retreat to the campsite and fell to the ground. He reached for his flashlight and quickly discovered that he had tripped over the dead body of Emma. Having no time to mourn the loss of his closest friends, he scurried back to his feet and made a beeline for the dim light of the campfire. A dark figure followed him there. He could hear footsteps in the leaves behind him. He turned around and saw that it was the very creature he was describing to his friends earlier in the evening. It closed in on him, breathing deeply through its snout. He knew the beast was about to do the same thing to him as it had done to his friends. He closed his eyes, swallowed the saliva in his mouth, and braced for it. The creature swung at David with its claws, and he ducked out of the way, surprising it. He grabbed a pocket knife from the back of his pants and slashed the thing's arms open. He took the blood from it with his fingers and applied it to his tongue. Smiling, he said, "This is for my father, you son of a bitch." He then said indistinguishable words from some ancient language, and both beings blacked out. David awoke, staring at his frightened body from above. He heard his own voice pleading for mercy, but he showed none. He reached down and ripped his own throat out. His arm was still cut, but it was healing quickly. As he walked away from the campsite, he remembered the words that came from his father's mouth just before the crash. He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. Camp is a style that prefers outrageous and exaggerated substance, a palate for bad taste. A camp is a temporary lodge typically dwelt in by travelers or adventurers. And camp, well, the story you're about to read is both campy in its style and substance, and named ever so fittingly after the nickname given to Camp Pinewater. Camp Pinewater got its unfortunately fortunate nickname from the nearby murky waters of Lake Pinewater and the legend harbored beneath. You see, at Lake Pinewater, there's something of an urban myth that served as the lakes and surrounding campgrounds claim to fame. The bog stalker. Now, if you've never heard of the bog stalker, you'd be forgiven, because essentially it doesn't exist. At least to some. To others, the bog stalker is a deeply endearing icon of the lakeside forests of North America, a less respected Bigfoot or Nessie in virtually every way. Yet it too has its share of disciples, and most of them rather conveniently live within 50 miles of pine water, which, mind you, is not a bog but a lake. So the whole bog stalker name in and of itself doesn't make a lick of sense, and neither does the legend at large. Now you'd think that an oversized bog-dwelling creature would be the last thing on people's minds, but you'd be wrong. You see, people eat this kind of thing up, especially in the middle of nowhere, where the only thing to do is hunt down a fictionalized monster. Course he's real, the man spat, depositing the rest of his loogie beside his boot and grinding it into the dirt. No one ain't seen him 'cause he's hidden. Why is he hiding? Rebecca asked cynically, jotting an X adjacent to the two others, winning her 7th game of tic-tac-toe against herself, her only worthy opponent. She did have some notes on the page, but her mind had clocked out hours ago. Was this really worth it? Driving all the way out to Buttfuck, Arkansas, wasting who knows how much precious petroleum just to interview some backwoods, probably inbred, tin-foil hat-wearing conspiracy nut. All in the name of a cheap buck. She didn't have that answer. She never did. But she was there, wasn't she? Smack dab in the middle of nowhere. And this wasn't the first time. What was it last month again? Bat Boy? Yeah, that was a good one. How about the woman that was having relations with her husband's ghost? Or the guy who claimed he was molested by a yeti? There were some weird folks that lived out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, by the middle of nowhere, she meant the podunk. Pocketed little cesspools squirming with the kookiest weirdos on God's green earth. And if you could believe it, some of those weirdos made the other weirdos look like beacons of normalcy by sheer comparison, which only proved just how wacky some people could get when cut off from the outside world. Thankfully, most of the fringe types were harmless folks, but every now and again there'd be one that stir the pot, tip the scale from conspiracy to collusion. Like those crackpots that cut crop circles, the ones that gave them all a bad name. And if they didn't, well, then she most certainly could. Well, now think about it, the man said, interrupting her inner monologue abruptly, dribble still dribbling on his scruffy chin. If he's caught, well, the government will probably cut him up and experiment and stuff on him. Rebecca nodded, biting her tongue. Anything else? The man stood obtusely quiet until he sprang alert. Oh yeah, he said, rushing back into his home. Not 5 seconds later did he emerge with a folded-up piece of paper, handing it over to Rebecca. I drew this as soon as I saw him. Well, police told me it wasn't evidence, but I swear he looked exactly like that. It was the most crudely drawn picture of a monster she had ever seen, so much so that it looked like a 4th grader would have laughed at it. She couldn't help but crack a grin, one that only widened when she noticed the same faded print on the man's wife-beater. He must have noticed her eyesight, as he too looked down at the scribbling on the shirt and smiled a toothy grin. You like it? He asked, his eyes wide. Old Pinewater liked it so much they started selling it on t-shirts. I make royalties now. Where do they sell it? Rebecca asked. The gift shop. I got some extras if you want one. What size are you? The man asked, looking down at the woman's blouse and embarrassingly twitching back to eye contact with a nervous smile. I'm good, thanks, that'll be all. Rebecca nodded with a click of her tongue and pen. Of all the ponds she had traversed in her travels, this one was the pondiest. Rebecca and her brand new Lincoln Continental, now in need of a fresh wash, stuck out like a sore thumb amidst the vast array of dilapidated houses and shacks that aligned the dirt road leading to her undesirable destination, Camp Pinewater, which was a place that should have only been visited by middle schoolers with an undeveloped brain. And yet, the good old city whisper insisted that Rebecca Morse drive her suite behind 1,000 miles into the boonies to milk. Yet another tragedy, all in the name of exploitation. It was a young boy this time, 13-year-old Marcus Johnson. And unlike the guy that got fondled by the abominable snowman, this kid wasn't able to book an interview because he went missing. She could see the cover now, young camper snatched by bog stalker. Not the kind of thing the parents would probably want to read, but according to the charts, 20 or so million subscribers did. The approaching fork in the road picked at the question festering on her mind. Continue on or go home. The fast lane back the way she came was right there, after all. But if she chose it, she could kiss that overdue promotion goodbye. But maybe she didn't want it. It was the sleaziest tabloid in town, after all, not exactly a career she saw herself in. But it paid the bills. And so, with an internal release, Rebecca let her foot off the brake and traveled onward. It was the dog days of summer for sure, but not even the dog dared to stick its snout into the sun. Instead, it merely licked itself under the shade of an overgrown oak, wrapped in the same metal chain that drooped from its neck. Not far away, beside an old-school bus whose yellow had faded a sickly white, was a mailbox perhaps fashioned in that same shade of oak, which looked as if it had been hit a dozen or so times by a stray pickup. And though it couldn't sing like a dog, the worn and rusted hinges on that box attested to the history and reputation of Camp Pinewater, which had seen its fair share of eviction slips over the years. Yet here it stood anyway. The only thing not standing, in fact, was the operator of the fine establishment, a gentleman by the name of Tom Wilson, who at one time was something of a lively, happy-go-lucky son of a gun, now diminished to something of a neurotic, rocking back and forth on the porch swing that hung against the camp office window and murmuring nonsense to himself. Then, in an instant, a brand spanking new Lincoln Continental pulled through the brush and broke to a stop atop the dusty gravel, a sight for sore eyes for Tom, considering all the cops in and out of the place over the last 4 days. But when he noticed the fancy pants blouse and smug, chiseled woman's step from the elegant upholstery, something told him his worry wasn't for nothing. He descended the porch and skipped across the hot dirt on the balls of his bare and calloused feet. And when he reached Rebecca, he smiled, not genuinely, of course, but wide enough to pass off his falsetto tone as genuine. "Good afternoon, ma'am. What brings you around these parts?" He smelled like smoke, somewhere in between a cigarette and a campfire. He probably hadn't showered in days, made apparent by the caked-on layers of sweat that clung to his face and the unkempt ball of hair on his head that looked like a sleeping cat. A dead, sleeping cat. "Well, I take it you're Tom Wilson." The man nodded clumsily. "I'm Rebecca. I'm with the City Whisper. I have some questions about Marcus Johnson." The man ran his fingers through the dead cat on his head, sighing heavily. "Now let me level with you, ma'am," the man pleaded, that falsetto tone dropping like a bead of sweat, which, rest assured, were dropping too. "I could tell you all about the differences between a clove hitch and a half hitch. Hell, I could show you how to kayak, shoot an arrow, and start a bonfire before it'd be time to eat lunch. But now listen to me. I don't know how to answer all these legal questions. Hell, I didn't even finish high school. Rebecca didn't bother with her notebook this time. She nodded out of what little genuine pity she had for the well-meaning man and rephrased her prompt. Well, all I want to know is what happened from your point of view. Well, I mean, I didn't see much of anything. I was getting supper ready, and some of the campers swarmed me, told me about Marcus immediately. Well, I thought the worst. Hell, I didn't know if the kid could swim. But the cops never found anybody in the lake. He's just gone. Rebecca nodded, biting her lip before asking, "What campers?" Well, friends of his, I take it. Perhaps a dozen or so boys. Well, they all felt terrible, see. They told me that they told Marcus that if he went into the outhouse, a spider would crawl up his backside and lay eggs in his stomach. Kids, right. Well, anyways, the kid refused to even look at the damn latrine. And so he decided to go pop a squat out into the woods. And after about 4 to 5 minutes or so, when supper was almost ready, one of our counselors asked his cabin mates where Marcus was, and they didn't know. Then they all came to me. She logged the story in the back of her mind like chicken scratch on her soggy brain. She could tell that Tom couldn't stand another question about the boy, so she opted to ask what was, in her eyes, a seemingly harmless one. "So do you think it was the monster?" Tom swallowed back any words he might have been rushed to say. Clearly, he had something on his mind, but his shifty eyes suggested that he might not have been at liberty to say it. After 2 more glances east and westward, confirming that no one else was around, he moved in closer on Rebecca, who could smell the sweat that had seeped under his pits. "Now that monster," he said, "is the reason this camp is still standing. Well, people love that crap. Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Rebecca, pardon my French. So much so that we got a damn gift shop about them. So real, not real. Well, don't matter to me. He sells, and I didn't even go to business school, ma'am. So you're saying it's a hoax. Now all I'm saying is that we're about to get a lot more business. Bog stalker for president, and I survived the bog stalker, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt, were just some of the designs in the gift shop, not to mention Ned's eyewitness drawing available in 6 different colors. There were plushies, coffee mugs, and even a bobblehead pen of the thing. But what struck her as most intriguing was a wall of masks. Plastic pieces of garbage covered in fake hair that felt like peach fuzz glued to a toolbox. And aside from the fact that they were almost out of stock and selling for $25, she couldn't get over the fact that there might have been a clue in this whole thing. With her disposable, she snapped a shot. "I take it you won't be buying nothing," a moist voice said. Rebecca turned sharply around with a gasp and noticed a young woman no older than 23 standing behind the counter and chewing on a wad of gum. The pigtails from her hair bounced with every smack from her lips, and Rebecca wondered why she didn't notice her there before. But the real question was why she was there at all. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said with a relieving breath. "I didn't see you there. I thought you were the bog stalker." "I get that a lot." The girl reached into her jaw and removed the wad, sticking it beneath the countertop, along with a dozen or so other flavors. "So you believe in that thing?" Rebecca asked. The girl shrugged. "I was going to say Satan, but that too." Rebecca nodded with a half smile. "Who are you?" "Well, I'm Tom's girlfriend," the girl said before Rebecca had time to finish. "I keep watch over the shop and bookkeeping." "Well, you're that lady from the papers, huh?" she asked. She was far too young to be Tom's girlfriend, but it seemed like that wasn't going to stop them. Not out here. The city whisper, yes, Rebecca said, stepping closer to the register counter. Yeah, well, I've read it before. You make us country folk look like hillbillies, she said, a sour look on her face. We're not all crazy, you know. Rebecca nodded softly. I know, I'm sorry. It was a relief saying that word for what might have been the first time. Oh, now it's all right, the girl said, noticing the embarrassment on Rebecca's face. The name's Casey, she said as she extended her hand. Rebecca, the girl's hand was softer than she expected, and yet her grip was firmer. Those masks sell well? Rebecca asked. Casey looked over her shoulder and nodded. Well, yeah, most popular thing we sell. You see, the campers like to scare each other, especially around the fire, telling ghost stories and whatnot, and then popping out in masks. It's pretty funny. Well, I bet, Rebecca said with a smile. You ever think their pranks go too far? Casey shrugged at that statement. I don't know, she said. One time we had a kid fall into the lake with his pants down. Well, I guess his friends might have taken that one a little too far. Rebecca nodded in understanding, stepping even closer to the countertop. Another step, and she would have been touching it. Reason I asked, she said, is 'cause Tom said this kid had bullies. You think they'd ever do anything to, hurt him? Casey chewed on the question for a second, popping a quarter into the gumball machine on the counter and twisting. A bright red sphere barely dropped into her hand before she jammed it into her mouth and crunched. The rack of masks stared back at her from across the wooden shack, and she put two and two together. Are you saying that they framed the bog stalker? Rebecca shrugged. Are you? Casey couldn't answer that one. Well, I think it'd be hard to mistake a giant monster for a 12-year-old kid in a Halloween mask, Casey said, duly noting the rack of masks. It was clear that the implication was a bit steep, even for Rebecca. Well, how about the employees, she said. Could any of them have done it, the counselors? Casey asked, her voice raised. Surely any finger pointed at one of them was 4 pointed back at herself. Or was it 3? If you're asking if they'd kidnap a kid, well, you best talk to Tom, and not even he would know, she said, a shot of hot air escaping her nostrils as she chortled. What? You think we run background checks out here? Rebecca knew they didn't. It could have been anyone. And anyone came in the form of a crudely torn piece of paper, wedged ever so conveniently beneath the driver's side windshield wiper of her Lincoln. She had just finished photographing the place as the sun began setting, and if she was going to reach the hotel before midnight, she needed to get going. The one-lane country road stretched on for miles, and it wasn't like she could take the freeway. Casey and Tom bid their farewell with a parting gift, or perhaps just a bribe to keep her article positive, a t-shirt with the doodle that was all too familiar to her by this point. She smiled and thanked them and turned for the car. And that's when she saw it, the paper. It looked as if it had been ripped from a spiral notebook, the paper moist and grungy, and smeared with a nearly illegible semblance of letters. And yet, somehow, she could faintly read the words. I know the truth, followed by an address. A tip. It would have been foolish for any woman, especially one as young and ambitious as Rebecca, to drive out to some lonesome house in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, and waltz right through the front door. God knows what might have been waiting for her. But then again, Rebecca was young, and she was ambitious. The drive was only about 5 miles or so, yet the curved and treacherous terrain made the spindling journey last about an hour. All the while, the moon's reflection off Pinewater acted as a sort of guide. The only beacon of light, aside from her zigzagging high beams, which weren't doing her much good anyway. She had almost struck 2 trees and killed a deer. So it was a relief when she first caught the first glimpse of a house, the first one she had seen in what felt like miles. It was a solitary, beat-up-looking place, engulfed in a nearly endless darkness, if not for the single bulb that illuminated the front porch. What the light revealed was about as tired-looking as she must have been. And for a moment, in her state of numb weariness, it dawned on her that this whole thing might have been one big practical joke. A wild goose chase orchestrated by some dumb kids or a pissed-off camp operator and his girlfriend. She was a fool, and although she should have turned back, something in her, call it her drive, or that sheer ambition forced her from that Lincoln, up the front steps, and onto the welcome mat, which, if it weren't trying to welcome her, definitely missed its hospitable mark, being about as tattered and worn as the note from her windshield. "Hello." The voice was about as abrupt as the entire situation was, and yet she still wasn't expecting it. She was spooked. Through a crack in the door, she could make out a dimly lit face, a man, his skin lumpy and stretched, with jet black hair jetting out of his ears and nose. "I'm sorry," she said, composing herself. "Are you the one that left the note on my car?" The man nodded. Yes. He tried to pull open the door when it snagged on the metal chain. He tried again, harder this time. "You've got to unlatch," the Rebecca started. But before she could finish, the man ripped the chain from the dry-rotted wood, its hinges squealing as it opened wide, filling the dark house with the same dull glow of the porch light. "Thanks," she murmured and stepped inside. The first step she took forced her to dip about a half-inch or so into the floor, her weight forcing the wood to creak. She caught her bearings and surveyed the house as she approached a dining room table amidst what was largely an empty room, cast in the blackness of night. And rolling in from that darkness came a pungent, rancid smell, perhaps a whiff of mucky lake water through an opened window, or a dead critter beneath the elevated flooring. Either way, it stunk like a skunk, and the man seemed not to notice or not to care. "Well, I know what happened," he said, bending down to sit across from her at the table, interrupting her self-talk. The chair bowed at his sitting, for he was a larger man, and it creaked similarly to the floor. "And who are you exactly?" She smiled, despite her facial muscles stiffening. The man took in a long, deep breath. "Well, I'm the bus driver," he said, his voice slow and drawled as if he were drugged or on drugs. "Well, I drive the bus for the camp." Rebecca nodded excitedly. Surely an employee, especially one with knowledge of the campgrounds such as a bus driver, would have known something of note. She took out her pad and pen. "And what did you see, sir?" The man breathed in. "I'm the bog stalker," he said. Rebecca laughed, but the man remained firm in his expression. "Tom," he continued, "makes me dress up like a monster." The man stood and stomped over to the closet, pulling it open and retrieving from its depths a large fur suit, brown, and matted like any of the run-of-the-mill gorilla suit from the 5-and-dime Halloween store. The man dragged the suit over the table and laid it across the tempered wood. Rebecca ran her fingers through the fur and stared up at the man, whose demeanor was still unchanged. "Well, why does he make you play dress-up?" she said, a smile cracking her lips open. "Well, says it's good for the camp," the man said. Legends of the bog stalker bring tourists and dollars. And the kid, Rebecca immediately said. Well, he's okay, the man smiled elastically. He's in on the joke. Rebecca blew out a confused sigh, rummaging her fingers through her long, silky hair, as what was a buildup and somewhat nervous laugh belched out from within her. So it was a publicity stunt, she laughed, shaking her head. I knew it. I damn well knew it. Well, what about the papers, the news? All in on the joke, he said. Brings tourists and dollars. Rebecca slapped the table. A smile wider than her cheeks spread across her face. Of all the kooky stories she had heard over the years, over her many travels nationwide, this one was the kookiest. She pulled out her disposable camera and aimed it readily at the suit draped over the table's edge. Before she pushed the little black button, she stopped herself and glanced up at the towering man. You don't mind, do you? No, the man said, lifting a large hand. She snapped away. After she was finished snapping, she politely thanked the man and stood from her seat. This was going to make one hell of a story, and if she could manage an interview with Marcus Johnson, it might even make the front page of the next issue, she thought. Thank you, Mr. Bob, the man said. Bob, thank you. Rebecca turned to face the door when the long road ahead dawned on her. It'd be hours before she reached the hotel. Might I use your bathroom? She asked, turning back around to face him. Bob looked off in the shadowy darkness, assumedly toward the bathroom in question, and nodded his head slowly. I'll only take a moment, she said before entering the darkness and finding her way. It was colder in this part of the house, and after her eyes adjusted, she could make out the frame of a door filled with the hue from a nearby window overlooking Lake Pinewater. It really was a beautiful sight, but her enjoyment was cut short by the returning stench that quickly filled the room, even stronger than it was before. She locked the bathroom door, and not unlike her nature, began to snoop diligently. And when she stuck her nose too close to the shower curtain, she backed away, knowing all too well that she had found the source of the smell. With one tug, she pulled the curtain back, and a wall of that same stench hit her in the face. She teared up with one breath, stepped back, and had to force her eyes open to see what it was. A black mass lay in the tub. It was a body, that of a shriveled, eaten-away young boy. Marcus Johnson, no doubt. Before she had a moment to process, there was a thud at the door, a jiggling of the handle before Bob's voice, muted and monotone, pushed through from the other side. Open the door, he said. The handle jiggled again. What the hell is this? Rebecca screamed, but Bob didn't answer. And after a deafeningly silent moment, there was another loud thud from the other side of the door. Open the door, the voice said. It was Bob's, but it was far deeper than even a moment before. Rebecca didn't respond. She had already shuffled along the bathroom wall to the window, trying to pry the rusted metal open. It wouldn't budge. The handle began jiggling faster, the thuds ramping into a succession of loud, heavy bangs. Open, 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 the voice screeched. It was deep and booming. It no longer sounded human, as if Bob was completely replaced by something awful and animal. The repeated lone word from the voice began to lose all semblance of meaning, as though the voice itself didn't even know what it was trying to say. The handle kept spastically shaking until it flew off the hinges, falling to the floor and rattling. And then, suddenly, two long, hairy fingers poked through the hole where the handle once sat and scraped the wood violently. When they made little progress, they retreated, and the hole was instead filled by the nostrils of something huffing deeply through the small opening. The noises it made were panicked and shrill, like that of a tortured chimpanzee. Rebecca screamed, thrusting her pen into the brittle glass window with all her might. 2 jabs and it cracked, 3 and it shattered, and 1 leap off the toilet, and she fell a story down and into the muddy grass below. She would have never loved the feel of mud and grass against her skin, but now it was the only thing she wanted to feel. Relief. She jumped to her feet and dashed for the car, not turning back. She could hear rummaging from within the house as she fled, a boost of adrenaline filling her as she turned the corner of the house and saw the Lincoln Continental. And with a final gust, she reached the car, flung open the door, and jumped inside, locking it immediately. She caught her breath, but only for a moment as she shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The high beams flashed on, and that's when she finally saw it. The Pinewater bog stalker. It was halfway from the house to the lake, sprinting with all its might with a jagged stagger. It might have been 7 feet tall and covered in a mangy coat of jet black hair. And unlike the image in her head, it was lanky, not bulky like the traditional apes she'd seen at the zoo. And at the same time, it was like the image she had seen, the ugly one Ned had drawn. It really was that ugly. In its arm it held Marcus Johnson, what was left of the boy anyway. He was hanging from its gangly hand, which nearly touched the ground. And from what she could tell, there was something else hanging off of its wet fur skin. Some type of rubbery suit fashioned from human skin, which at one point she might have called Bob. It took a final glance over to the headlights, its beady eyes glowing with the reflection of the high beams, and jumped into the gloomy water without another beat. Rebecca, without waiting around herself, put the car in reverse and hightailed it out of there. All she had after that was a panic attack and a couple of pictures, mostly of a rundown summer camp and a dirty old monster suit, which wasn't exactly going to make her story any easier. The house, she'd come to find out, was abandoned, and the body of little Marcus Johnson was, as she knew it, vacated from the premises either in the stomach of that thing or somewhere along the bottom of Pinewater. The only thing left she had to go off of was her own testimony, which, giving her track record of falsified tales, wouldn't have held up all too well either. No one would ever believe her, not even the folks back at the City Whisper, who never took any of this stuff seriously anyway. And who could blame them? Who could blame her? That's at least the story they're going with. That old camp, Camp Pinewater, with variations here and there, of course. Some of the times the yarn is spun around the fire. The campers go into the gory details of how the bog stalker ate her guts out. That one usually ruins most of the group's appetite for s'mores. Or some of the times, fueled by her lust for that promotion of hers, Rebecca becomes the bog stalker herself. A clever little plot twist for a bunch of middle schoolers, don't you think? The truth of the matter, if such a thing even exists for such a ridiculous, campy story, is that, well, we'll never truly know. We either listen to the witness of a pathological liar, a greedy summer camp, a handful of conspiracy theorists, or a bunch of middle schoolers. It's funny, 'cause that's exactly how the bog stalker would have liked it. Man, why I don't go to summer camp anymore. I've been attending Camp Willowbrook for about 4 years now. I just loved camping, being able to see some new faces, and getting to do fun and exciting activities. My favorite part was the lake rope swing. I never wanted to leave that swing once I got on. I was just so excited to go back, mainly because it would be the last year I went. Summer finally came, and it was time to head to camp. When I got there after a 4-hour car ride, I was so excited. I was just on a big nostalgia trip, remembering all of my old favorite places. First things first, my mom had to take me into the lodge to get signed up. When we got into the lodge, there were a lot of people there. We waited in line until it was our turn to sign up. Before we were handed any papers, the lady at the table told us that there had recently been some weird things going on a few miles down through the woods from us. I just kind of ignored it. My mom helped me lug my suitcase to the cabin. When we got there, I was so happy to see some of my old friends from last year. Tyler, one of my longtime camp friends, was sitting in a corner making his bed. Marcus, another one of my really good friends, was on the floor taking stuff out of his bag. And who could forget about Connor? He was still putting stuff in the closet like baseball bats and golf clubs. As for the other 2 kids, I had no idea who they were, but they both seemed to like me. It turns out they were brothers. Their names were Ethan and Noah, and it was their first year. They were kind of nervous. We all got settled in, and after our parents left, we sat down and started talking about past adventures at camp. It wasn't for another hour that our cabin leader arrived. When he got in, he kind of looked at all of us with a gloomy face. He turned to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm your cabin leader for the next 2 weeks. Now, before we do anything, I have to tell you that some things have changed, and we will have to be more cautious due to the strange things that have been happening." We were all a little uneasy, but we wouldn't let that stop us from having the best summer ever. The day continued on as normal. We introduced ourselves, played some cards in our cabin, went outside and played basketball, went to the mess hall to eat, and came back to the cabin to sleep. It was kind of odd that there were only 6 cabins full of people. Usually, there are around 30. So the next day when we woke up, it was raining hard. The sounds of the rain smacking the metal roofs of the cabins echoed off in the distance. The camp leader was nowhere to be found. We kids kind of sat around the middle of the cabin, just waiting for him to get back. We started talking about some ghost stories that happened around the camp. Some of them seemed completely stupid, but others were kind of scary. Outside of our cabin, there were about 400 acres of forest, and in those woods there were some obstacle courses, the chapel, and the lake. There was one more thing in the woods that nobody really knew about because it was so far off. It was the original camp, Willowbrook Cabins. There were only a few of the older cabin leaders that knew about it and how to get to them. Supposedly, back in the early 1900s, when the camp was first established, 2 kids got into a fight in their cabins. One killed the other in his sleep. He had apparently taken a heavy rock and dropped it on the other boy's head. Legend has it that the presence of the boy who was killed lurks around the old campground and chapel. The boy could sometimes be seen crying at the back of the chapel, and someone even said they went to the cabins and saw his head peeking out from one of the windows. Now, at this point, everyone in our cabin was really scared, and I swear Connor was going to have a panic attack. Then our group leader came rushing in through the cabin door. He told us that we needed to pack our things and go to the lodge. He would have to call our parents in the morning to tell them to take us home. He walked all the way from our cabin to the lodge in the rain, completely drenching our stuff. When we got there, only 4 other cabins were there. As I was sitting next to the fireplace with my cabin mates, we overheard people talking about what was going on. Someone had said that all of Cabin 6 had gone missing after returning from chapel. Later that night, I woke all my friends. I wanted to go check out what had happened in the woods. Though at first they were very hesitant, they still agreed to tag along with me. We grabbed a few flashlights and snuck past the cabin leaders that were sleeping near the exit. And when we got outside, it was still raining, but now it was pitch black outside. This didn't stop us from heading over to the woods. When our group finally got to the mouth of the woods, Connor and Marcus just couldn't do it. They sadly walked back to the lodge through the shortcut in the gardens. All that were left were Tyler, Ethan, Noah, and I. We walked slowly through the thin path towards the chapel, and every now and then we would trip over some uprooted trees, but we still kept going. We could see the chapel ahead of us, but there was something wrong. It was very quiet. The rain had stopped. There was no wind nor any kind of animal in sight. As we walked up to the chapel, Ethan, who was carrying one of the flashlights, just started screaming. He ran as fast as he could back towards camp and dropped his flashlight. The light was shining towards the chapel, and through one of the illuminated windows, we saw the face of a child crying. We all screamed and started to run towards the camp. Out of fear, we all lost sense of direction and had no idea where we were. We came up to a ravine that led down to the lake. There was a small, black figure that blocked our path. Our only way out was taking the ravine. Noah, Tyler, and I began scaling down the side of it, and we noticed another figure, but of our own. I shined my flashlight downways, and there was Ethan laying dead, head smashed in, blood everywhere. He must have tripped on an uprooted tree and fallen down the side of the ravine. But we had to just keep running. We were halfway down the ravine, and we could feel the sweat falling into our eyes like ocean water. And there it was again, a figure of a little boy standing at the end of the ravine, waiting for us to play with him. I told everyone to just keep running. I looked behind us, and Noah had disappeared, completely gone. Tyler and I saw the old stairs coming up on our left that led back up to the part of camp. When we got to them, we were almost to the top. We could hear a kid saying, "We can play with the rocks." We didn't stop to look back. We ran all the way to the lodge. When we got there, all the cabin leaders were awake. 2 other cabins had left to go investigate what was going on in those woods, and they both went missing. Tyler finally spoke up. He hadn't said anything all night until now. I saw him. The boy just wanted to play with us. Now, years had passed since that encounter. Tyler was sent into a mental hospital for some serious trauma. Marcus and Connor were found buried under that chapel after they demolished it. Their bodies were cut up, their hands cut off and put into a small chest across from them. As for the other 3 cabins of kids, nobody ever found out what happened or where they went. Maybe they just didn't want to be found. It's been 20 years since I worked as a counselor at Camp Silverpine. 20 years that I've tried to forget what I've seen, lying to myself and others about what I know happened. And for many of those years, I succeeded in fooling myself, pushing the dark thoughts into a hidden place in my mind. But after reading the newspaper today, I could lie no longer. Let me begin with my story. I started when I was 15, spending my summers away at Camp Silverpine. The camp was nestled in the foothills of the Blue Mountains, in a valley between two peaks with a natural lake at the center, its waters stained murky with mountain clay. I worked as a swim instructor, and each week a new set of campers traveled from across the state to experience the outdoors. I still remember the exact day it happened. Tuesday, 5th week of camp, the hottest day of that summer, and just before the 4th of July. That week was known as Rich Week to the counselors, since many of the wealthier parents took off for the holiday and left their children behind. It came right after the Orphan Week, which was when the Millbrook Orphanage, the largest in the state, traveled to camp free of charge because the camp was government-owned. Yearly, the local residents came by at the end of the week, and children were often adopted. Just last week, a girl in my class had found a new home with some farmers a few miles out, and I remember seeing Lucy wave from the cab of a pickup truck as she started her new life in the country. Now, as a swim instructor, in my time off, I helped the sail instructors patch sails under the water sports canopy. Jake, the head of water sports, and about 5 years older than me, sat across from the picnic table. His small eyes looked over the lake. Jake kept his hair in a tight buzz cut, revealing a scar around the back of his head. And when he spoke, it was in a deep mountain drawl. "Mike, what you doing?" he growled, noticing I had skipped a stitch. "I only got 2 eyes, and there's too much going on for me to watch everyone today." "Got it," I said, and I put my head down. Jake kept a tight watch on his crew, but now his focus was on the lake. Eddie and Teddy, 2 twin counselors with one brain between them, were teaching a beginner swimming course. Eddie and Teddy always made Jake uneasy, and had earned a spot of 1st and 2nd on his mental list of instructors who were most likely to screw up. So when Eddie, the smaller of the 2, came sprinting up from the lakeside so fast his long legs spewed a dirt exhaust behind him, Jake was ready. Eddie opened his mouth, words wheezing in between each intake of breath, and his wet hair plastered over one eye. We're missing one camper. We can't find him in the water. Friends don't know where he is either." And without hesitation, Jake's whistle shrieked through the campground, startling campers and counselors alike. "Out of the water! Out of the water! All lifeguards to the dock!" he shouted, his deep chest working like a bellows. As adrenaline shot through me, we ran to the water. As a lifeguard, it was our responsibility to search for the body, and 15 of us lined up at one end of the swimming section. At Jake's call, we dove myself in the deep end at 14 feet, and we spread out across the bottom. The water filtered sunlight and heat, so the bottom was cold and dark, with underwater plants that gripped against my calves and pulled me back as I swam. After 3 strokes, I returned to the surface, and Jake sent us back down again to search, hoping to find a still warm form. I was the one who found the body. Its hand brushed against my face, a pale palm that was too white. I saw the face next, too dark to recognize, but a girl with long hair that fanned around her like she was under static electricity. I gasped involuntarily, drawing water into my lungs, gripped her torso, and began swimming to the surface. She felt swollen, her arms too big, and her temperature cold that I will never forget. Halfway to the surface, I felt her leg catch on something, and she was being pulled back down, out of my grip. I turned, watching her open eyes on mine as she descended. But my lungs screamed, and I knew I needed air or I would join her down below for much longer than intended. "I found her," I shouted, breaking the surface quickly, and I dove back down, my hands sweeping through the muddy bottom. But I found nothing but muck and empty water, even as the other lifeguards joined 5 minutes later, and Jake's whistle rang out again, calling us to the dock. "The camper's been found," he announced. "In a restroom by his site. Eddie and Teddy must have let him slip past both of them. You'll spend this night scrubbing the dock with your own toothbrushes." He paused, and I felt the other lifeguard's gaze fall on me. "Y'all free to go, except for Mike. Mike, a word if you will." The others trudged away, looking back at us over their shoulder. Jake focused on me, spittle meshing with his words as he hissed. "Now, I don't know what in the hell that was about, Mike, but you could have cost us a life with your false call back there. And the next time you try something like this, I'll take yours." "But I saw something," I insisted. "I don't believe in ghosts, Mike, and we scoured that water. Now get the hell out of my sight. You're off waterfront." He left, and word spread around camp about what had happened. I could tell many of them detested me, and no one believed what had happened. So I quit the next week and pushed the thought from my mind, though it still found my dreams. That was 20 years ago, and today I hold the newspaper, the top article calling back my memories. Murders at Camp Silverpine. 19 skeletons have been discovered in the lake of Camp Silverpine. Several aged at over 30 years since time of death, and none younger than 10. Due to renovations, the lake was drained, revealing a collection of bones at the deepest region. Several femurs were found attached to anchors with rope. And after much investigation, the state police discovered the source of the bodies. 10 years ago, before Millbrook Orphanage was shut down for embezzling state funds, each summer their orphans spent a week at the camp. 19 were thought to be adopted by locals in nearby proximity to the camp. But after reviewing records, police have discovered these adoptions were never documented. All 19 were drowned and disposed of in the lake at an area too deep for the campers to normally enter, except for one that drifted near the swimming area due to an insecure rope. It is believed that the orphanage collected funds appropriated for these children long after their death. Police encourage anyone with information on the matter to step forward. A few years ago, I went on a camping trip with 3 of my close friends, Marcus, Alex, and my sister Maya. It was late in November, and the weather was cold, wet, and gray. We were in the woods, miles away from our town, and everything had become more distant and darker. After a few hours of hiking, we settled into a tent for the night. Our tent wasn't a fancy one like a 4-season one with poles and stakes, but it was just right for us. There was some tension brewing between Marcus, Alex, and Maya, and I knew why. Marcus was the butt of my sister's jokes for one reason: he was a logger's son. Alex, understandably, didn't like this. For a while, we sat around our campfire, listening to music and goofing around. But at some point, the rain started to come down again. I think it's safe to say all of us were wet, miserable, and cold as we sat around an electric heater cheating, I know. Marcus frowned and got up. "This isn't going to be enough," he said. "I'll grab some firewood. I'll only be a few minutes." "Try not to take too long," Maya chuckled. "We don't want the hide behind getting you." Marcus frowned and shrugged, picking up a shopping bag we brought with us, and started walking into the forest. "Why you got to be so mean to the guy?" Alex said, chastising Maya. "Just because he's a logger's kid doesn't mean you get to make fun of him." Maya shrugged. "What can I say?" she said. He's what some might call a redneck. You leave the poor guy alone for once, Madison. Madison, Maya scoffed and glanced towards me. It's fine to make fun of people, right, Sophie? Can we just stop bickering? I said plainly. We're here to have fun, not to tear each other's throats out. There was silence for a few moments. All right, Maya finally said, defeated. We waited for a few more minutes, then 10 more minutes, then half an hour. Marcus didn't come back. After a while, we started getting a bit impatient, but not especially worried. Marcus probably went to the other side of the lake or the other side of the forest, or maybe he went somewhere else altogether. We were used to that kind of thing. We'd never known him to turn up more than 5 minutes late. Where is he? Alex said after a while. He's been gone for an hour and a half now. You're right, I said, sighing. Guess we'd better find him. Hold on, you're suggesting we drop everything and go into those woods without so much as a baseball bat to use as a weapon? Maya asked incredulously. I just nodded. Yes, I said. He might be injured somewhere, or even worse, he'll know we're looking for him. I said we're going to have to follow him, said Alex as he got up. Maya made a point of staying put. Well, I'm staying here, she said. Fires keep wild animals away, and I don't exactly want to end up face to face with a grizzly bear. Alex shrugged as I got up. It's either this or leave a man who's mortally wounded, he said, and with that he began walking into the woodland. I gave Maya a final glance and a shrug and followed Alex. As soon as we'd left the small clearing, Alex took off running towards the west. He'd reached the edge of the forest before I caught up with him, and after a few minutes later, he'd found a trail. The trees here were mostly pine with a few maples scattered amongst them, and the smell of smoke and the tang of sulfur came from the all-encompassing darkness. During the day, a place such as that would look truly beautiful. But in the dark, though the low visibility lent a sense of foreboding to the area. This feels weird, I said after a few minutes. I can't exactly say I like it here, Alex shrugged. Either way, maybe we'll find Marcus here. The trail was almost a straight line, but even in the fog, I could tell that it took us away from the edge of the forest to the west. As we walked, the air grew hotter and thicker until it seemed to me that I was breathing through a sponge. I could feel it as a weight on my back and chest, and I tried to draw in the warm air as best as I could. But that was when I realized something. Something was completely wrong. Why was it hot and humid in the late fall? I think Alex realized around the same time I did. This is wrong, he said, looking around. It's not right. This place isn't right. I know, I said. Why is it this hot in November? The sky tore apart with a violent crash of thunder. In the distance, there was a flash of lightning. Just our luck, a storm. We reached a fork in the trail, one that seemed to lead toward the western end of the forest. There was a slight gust of wind, and I cringed as a foul odor, a horrid stench of decay, filled my nostrils. Oh, what the hell stinks, Alex said. No clue, I replied. We looked at each other, and I could tell that he was as confused as I was. We collectively decided to keep walking and tried our best to ignore the stench. Eventually, though, I gave up. Screw this, I said, walking into the smell's direction. I had to know what it was. I shoved the vegetation aside with one hand, covering my mouth and nose with the other hand, and then my gaze rested on a large, rotting mass on the ground. And by large, I mean huge. The corpse of some immense creature lay on its side, the mouth open wide, and its cow-like eyes frozen with a look of confusion and panic. Its tongue lolled out of its beak-like jaws, hanging lifelessly from the side of its open mouth. Black putrid fluid oozed out of the many wounds covering its body. The remnants of a small, fleshy comb topped its head, reduced to a flap of graying, desiccated, and rotting skin. "Jesus," Alex muttered. "What the hell is that?" "I have no clue," I said plainly. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know what the creature was. There was another bright flash, followed by thunder. I tried counting how many seconds came between the lightning and the noise. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was another ungodly crash. 5 seconds, that meant it was just close to a mile away. "Holy shit," Alex whispered. Then there was another, closer flash of lightning above the forest nearby. I could have sworn the trees moved. It was almost imperceptible, almost too fleeting to tell, but I was sure I saw it. Then came the thunder and something else. The ground began to tremble, as if the earth beneath us was shifting, as if it were about to collapse. Just as quickly as the sensation came, it stopped. The trees ahead began to shake and tremble as the form of some great beast came closer. It was big, it had to be. Nothing else in the forest could do this. The trees kept moving as if some almighty god of the forest was making its way towards us. And come to think of it, it may as well have been. The trees closest to us began to tremble, their branches rustling as if they could snap off. And just then, the thing came out of the trees. I got a quick glimpse of a huge, boxy head, a set of huge, powerful legs, and a long tail, and then I ran like hell. "What the hell is that?" Alex shouted. I didn't reply. The ground trembled again, like some gargantuan alligator broadcasting its intentions towards us. There was another sound now, like a distant rumble of thunder, which could have only come from the behemoth. We dove through the trees to our right, the branches scratching our skin as we forced our way through. We got deeper into the forest, our breaths coming in heaves as we ran. I realized we were running uphill now, and as I looked back to the thing that was chasing us, I could see that it was gaining on us. Small, beady eyes glared malevolently at us as it came closer, its mouth opening to reveal huge teeth, each the same length and width as a railroad spike. I screamed. Alex was sprinting behind me, and I could see that he was struggling. "Sophie, it's coming closer." I heard Alex grunt as we reached the top of the hill, sprinting down the other side. Something smashed through the trees behind us, and the noise was almost deafening. The wind whistled in my ears, sounding like the scream of a banshee. "Faster," Alex shouted. I heard him stumble behind me as the wind seemed to cut off. I could feel my body struggling to climb the hill, my breathing labored, my head pounding so hard that I couldn't see straight. I felt as if I'd been running forever, like I was going to vomit. Ahead of us, the ground suddenly disappeared, and a huge slope descended into the valley before us. The rumble sounded again from about 20 feet behind us. It was close now, really close. It was a toss-up between the jaws of death and a few broken bones. I heard the agonized scream of Alex behind me, followed by the sound of bones crunching. The decision had been made for me. I rushed forwards towards the ravine. It looked like there was water at the bottom, and so I jumped. The wind blew into my face as I fell. It was almost deafening. The jaws of the thing above snapped shut on thin air. The water below rushed up to meet me. I hit the surface of the water with a force that knocked the air out of my lungs. I flailed through the icy water, trying to keep my head above the surface. I could feel the cold seeping through my body, my muscles seizing up. I could feel my limbs stiffening, but I couldn't stop struggling. I kept moving upwards until I broke the surface of the water. I could see the rocks rising up out of the water ahead of me, and the sky above me was so bright that it was almost unbearable. I climbed up onto the rocks. I was alive. I could feel the air on my back, warmed from the sun. I was so grateful to be alive that I almost burst into tears. I was close. I could see the opposite rock ledge a few feet away from me, and then I turned around and I saw it. Scraggly filaments covered parts of its body. Powerful jaw muscles worked, crushing and grinding what little bone remained in its unfathomably large mouth. A pair of small, white eyes gleamed with a primal malevolence. Ragged breaths escaped the gargantuan beast's jaws. The beast thing before me was an apex predator. I had no doubt about that. A concoction of blood and saliva poured from the monster's open jaws, mixing with the water and clouding the water surface. This is it, I thought to myself. This is the thing that just killed Alex. The realization hit me that I was looking into the jaws of death itself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away from the thing, and I think it was at that moment that I just accepted my fate. At any moment, the thing was going to make its way down the canyon and devour me. There was a bright light, and the thing suddenly pulled its head back and turned around. A loud rumble shook me to my very core as something flew over, and the light became blinding. A helicopter. I began waving furiously, trying to get the attention of the chopper. It began descending into the canyon, bathing it in an eerie glow. I looked up, and the thing was gone. I watched wide-eyed and breathless, as the chopper landed not even 100 yards from me, and I ran towards it, excited, scared, and hopeful all at the same time. I climbed in, hoping and praying for them to have found Maya, or anyone else for that matter, alive. I felt like I could do anything. I was free. Inside the helicopter, there was a man dressed in a bulky uniform with the acronym CHRONOS. I'd never seen an acronym like that before. These couldn't have been search and rescue people. I didn't know how to properly address the guy, so I blurted it out. Who the hell are you? What was that thing? The helicopter began to ascend as the man replied. Calm down, miss, what's your name? Sophie Mitchell. What the hell was that thing? The man didn't speak for a second. It was as if he was trying to decide exactly what to say. A temporal aberration, he said. It's the result of an anomalous change to the time-space continuum. Anomalous aberration, I said. What are you on about? Is Maya okay? He shook his head. I'm afraid there's a lot we don't know. There's no one alive on the ground. I didn't know what to say. The truth was that I was terrified. I was afraid that Maya was gone, and there was no way she could still be alive. And who are you? I said after a few moments. The man frowned as if he wasn't expecting me to ask that, and he hesitated before he answered. Well, I work for an organization called Chronos. Well, yeah, no shit, I said. The man ignored me. Well, we specialize in dealing with situations such as this. Temporal aberrations, I mean, were named after the Greek personification of time. There have been many instances like this all across the globe. Like what? He paused for a breath. Well, I think we'd better get back to the compound first. Compound, I said, perhaps a little quicker than I would have liked. What compound? Well, I suppose compound isn't exactly the best word for it. more like a facility or something. The helicopter flew on for a while. I think it was about 20 minutes until we reached the compound, but I wasn't paying too much attention. The walls of the place were made of some kind of dark gray material and had that prison feel to them. The helicopter landed on the roof, and the soldiers opened the door for us. I got out and felt my legs go a little wobbly. The compound was in a bad state, with burnt-out hulks of cars and wrecked machinery everywhere. We walked down a dark, narrow path made out of tarmac and concrete, which eventually stopped at a small metal door with a large red button on it. "Open it," the man said. The other man went up to the door and opened it. We entered the compound. A sign with a few lines of text was painted on the wall. The word CHRONOS was stamped underneath the lines of text, as well as several symbols that I didn't recognize. "What is this place?" I asked. "Some kind of government building." "That's right," one man said. "Sorry for the mess," another guy joked, "but we ain't exactly the most well-funded organization. The government doesn't exactly believe that dinosaurs are roaming all over the globe. The feds used to take us seriously, and now we're just the crackpots of the United States." We entered a large, open room. It was dimly lit with only 2 windows with blinds on the windows. In the middle of the room was a round table with 2 chairs around it. The man who brought me here gestured for me to sit down, and so I obliged. The guy who opened the door came back into the room with 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks," he said as he put the cups down. "No problem," the other man said. "You're welcome." So the man said, "I thought you might want to know why you were here, what this whole thing's about, and what the hell is a temporal aberration." Not exactly knowing what to say, I just nodded. "Well, from what we understand, it's some sort of ripple effect that takes place in the space-time continuum. Somehow, this results in the divergence of certain events from the pre-existing timeline, creating a new reality which runs concurrently with our own. And sometimes, just sometimes, animals from different times just appear." "Like what?" I asked, now even more bewildered. "Well, I can name you a few examples. There was a farm in Australia that was raided by some sort of megareptiloid. The farmer lost 7 of her sheep before it was gunned down. In another incident, the very fabric of reality regurgitated something. And there was the unexplained disappearance of 3 people in the Philippines just a few months back. There was one survivor from the group, a gibbering wreck. The poor girl said something about a long neck, long legs, wings, kind of a head like that of a stork. But most of the sightings appear to be of the Cretaceous taxa, a Megaraptor theropod, and of course, what you saw, Tyrannosaurus rex." "Hold on," I said. "You're telling me my friend was eaten alive by a Tyrannosaurus rex?" The man simply nodded. Something about the way he behaved just unnerved me somehow. It was as if he didn't even find any of this strange. And finally, he spoke again. "Listen, we still don't understand how any of this works. Believe me, besides knowing what exactly results from these temporal aberrations, we're just as clueless as you are." At first, I felt as if the guy was just messing with me. Obviously, he noticed a suspicious look in my eye or something, because the next thing I knew, he was pulling up some sort of tablet and practically shoving it into my face. "Here," he declared, "here's the evidence." I took hold of the tablet. There were a few images, I can't remember how many, but there were at least 7. I only looked at 5. One of them depicted something tall, its legs blending into the trees with a large, beaked head. Another showed a large cadaver which had apparently washed up somewhere on a beach in Morocco. The creature's neck was twice as long as the rest of it. The third and fourth both showed some sort of large. Well, I didn't know what the hell it was. Well, that there is a Echolopterus renanii, the man said, explaining what the thing was. That thing, that's the biggest exoskeleton-bearing animal to ever live. I looked at the final image, which the label said was taken somewhere in the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. The photo was in sepia, and it looked like it was taken with an old Polaroid camera. The photograph depicted a snowscape with a distant mountain range looming in the background. Sandwiched between them was a forest. Maybe 200 feet from the camera I saw. Well, the thing stood on two powerful limbs with a large, muscular tail balancing its front half. Its arms were almost comically tiny, but they looked robust, and the head. Well, the head was huge, at least 5 feet long. The photo was too blurry to make out most of the details of its head, but I could make out that its eyes faced forwards. The snout was long and thick, and through its open jaws, I could just barely discern a set of large teeth. Well, that there is your animal. That's the Tyrannosaurus rex that's from the first case we ever investigated, the man said, without batting an eye. The photograph was taken shortly before Chronos was established in 1933. The man let that sink in for a few moments. Then the interview continued. Nothing else interesting became of it, just some routine questions and some background information that went straight over my head for the most part. After about a half an hour, it was over, but I still had one more question. Plucking up the courage to speak up, I asked, "So what now? I mean, do I get to go home?" The man didn't look sure of himself for a few moments. It was as if he wasn't expecting that. "Well, how close was the campsite from your home?" he asked. "About 10 miles. Why?" He sighed. "Well, large predators have large territories. If our estimates are correct, an animal the size of a T-Rex, they have a home range of about 500 square kilometers. It might not be safe for you to go back home." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to leave my home, the home I'd lived in for my entire life. "But you know, temporary accommodation will be provided, of course," the man said. "We'll settle things with the authorities, of course. The disappearance of 3 people are going to seem suspicious. Besides you, we're the only people who know that." I shifted nervously in my chair, still trying to figure out exactly what to say. "Will I be able to move back?" I asked. "To my old home, I mean." "Well, of course," the man said. "Of course. As soon as the situation's been dealt with and things are settled with the authorities, you're free to go back home." "Will I started, but the man interrupted. "As soon as you get to your temporary accommodation," the man said. "Yes, this operation isn't exactly under any sort of embargo. It's more of a matter of whether anyone would believe you. Hell, it might even be good for this organization's credibility," he joked. We talked for a few more minutes, and then the man got up. I stood, and we shook hands, and with that, I walked out of the room. Questions buzzed through my mind all the while. No matter how much I tried to distract myself, I wondered what other information the man was withholding. I wondered what would happen to me if they decided that what I'd said was no longer part of the organization's interest. But none of that happened. I was given temporary accommodation only about a half a kilometer away. I was assigned a bunk in a small room with 2 other people whose names I will not disclose for obvious reasons. They were in the same situation as me. I was given clothes as well, and was given a little plastic bag to hold my few personal belongings. And that's where I am now. I'm writing all of this to get things off my chest. Except for my roommates, I've told nobody about this. I don't exactly know how to end this, besides with a warning. There's a lot about the world that we don't understand. The planet on which we live is a mysterious place, and the untamed, primal realms we have yet to explore conceal all sorts of creature species that, by all accounts, should no longer exist or should never have existed to begin with. It's a dangerous world out there. Let me tell you a story. There's a small town on the outskirts of a slightly larger town. The people there call it a city, and this is where I live. I live in a big house with a lot of land, and though my favorite place to go has always been the forest. I love the big trees and the dense bushes and the howl of the animals at night. In a small clearing in the midst of the woods and bordered by a field stands a lone cabin. This was my clubhouse, my base of operations, my castle, my home away from home. I loved it. I decorated it and called it my own. My favorite times were when I would spend the night out there. My friends and I telling ghost stories and squealing late into the night. I didn't always stay out with a friend, though. The woods were my home. I loved them. I was never afraid. I would pack up my sleeping bag and march proudly down the trail with my little lantern until I came upon my cabin. I would unlock the door with my special skeleton key and set up my bag on the cot my mom had given me. I did this one night, one clear summer's night. I settled in per usual and listened to the sounds of nature. The chirps of crickets and hoots of owls were my lullaby, soothing me to sleep. I don't know when exactly it changed, though. I only know it was dark. The once abundant noise of the nocturnal forest faded, and the silence was so loud it jolted me awake. The forest only goes quiet for one of two things, a storm or a predator. I glanced up at the window in the wall above my head and saw at once there was no storm. The moon and the stars shone down on me like a million diamonds, illuminating the black velvet of the night sky above the clearing. I figured there must have been a predator, some wolf or cougar on the prowl. The window was locked and the door barred. No matter what creature may be out there, I was safe. I snuggled back in and rolled to face the room, back against the wall. I began to drift back to sleep, reassured by my logic and the security of my little abode. A soft grunt came next to my ear, clearly heard through the paper-thin walls of my cabin. My eyes shot open, and I laid perfectly still as a subtle sniffing followed the grunt. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, hoping that the creature would go away before making an attempt to break into my cabin. I smelled like prey and was on ground level. Of course it would attempt to pursue me. I only hoped it wouldn't hurt itself trying to break through the walls. My hope was misplaced, though. The sniffing stopped. I waited a few minutes and then I sighed. It had left. But something else was wrong. The light. The moon had cast light through a small window above me, but that light was gone. Not completely, though. There was enough left to show the silhouette of a head and shoulders blocking the window. I rolled onto my back as quietly as I could and looked up. There was indeed something in the window, something for which I have no words. I stopped moving, paralyzed, mouth open in a mock scream. It cast its head downwards, and its eyes, those awful, soulless red eyes, looked into mine, peering into the depths of my soul. And that is when I screamed loud and shrill, a cry for life, mercy, help. And that is when it moved, faster than the eye can follow. The cabin, my safe haven, crashed in on me, and the world went black. Now let me tell you another story. There's a small town on the outskirts of a slightly larger town. The people there call it a city. This is where I live. I lived in a big house with a lot of land, though my favorite place to go has always been the forest. I love the big trees and the dense bushes and the howl of the animals at night. The big house no longer exists, replaced by a worn-out shell comprised of a few sorry, crumbling walls. The woods are still there, though, and the field too, though now overgrown and unkempt. In a small clearing in the midst of these wild woods stands a lone cabin. Many stories are told about this cabin and about the things that had happened there all those years ago. What exactly happened, though? Well, nobody knows for sure. Some say it was a madman escaped from a nearby prison. Others say it was a case of child abuse. Others still say it was an accident or an attack from a rabid animal. Hidden among these, though mostly popular with the kids, are other theories. Supernatural theories. These theories range from demon to werewolf, but the major theme is curiosity. All their lives, children are told to stay out of those overgrown woods, but children never do as they're told. They're told that there is no cabin there, that the tales of the supernatural are wives' tales, urban legends. The children have a different idea, though. The cabin, they say, still stands, and whatever was there that night still lurks inside that wooden house from hell. The stories scare the children for a while, but as they grow older and more adventurous, they begin to question it. Then the dares start. I dare you to spend a night in Hell's cabin, and they do. Curious youngsters come every so often. I see them, their nervous faces flushed from the effort of the trek through the weeds and ivy, the looks of surprise and suppressed fear on their faces when they see the cabin is there, looming in the middle of the clearing. They usually come in groups, fears suppressing the desire to come alone. These groups stay scared through the night, then they leave. I watch, sad that they have come and gone. But some come alone. It is for these brave souls that I wait. I watch as the sun goes down and the crickets chirp, their noise lulling the child to sleep. I watch as the moon rises and the stars twinkle, and I leave my hiding spot. The forest goes quiet, and I watch as the silence disturbs the child. I watch through the window, my silhouette cast down onto the floor. I see the child freeze, fighting the urge to look out of the small window. And sometimes I have to knock, but they always give in to their curiosity eventually. With the turn of their head, mine meet their eyes, the look of confusion, then fear, as my deep red eyes penetrate deep into their soul, seeing their past, present, and reading their future. I grin, showing my pointed, yellow teeth. They open their mouths and scream. The cabin crashes, and the world goes black. I slip away as the sun peeks over the horizon, and I watch as yet another victim is found in the cabin from hell. Benjamin had always dreamed of owning a place in the woods, away from the noise and stress of the city. He was browsing online for some properties when he stumbled upon a listing that seemed too good to be true. A cozy, rustic cabin on a large plot of land surrounded by cedar trees and a creek for a bargain price. Of course, the only catch was that the seller, a widow named Mrs. Henderson, wanted to meet the buyer in person and finalize the deal as soon as possible. Benjamin contacted Mrs. Henderson and arranged to visit the next day. He drove for hours, following her directions until he reached the dirt road to the property. He parked his car and got out, admiring the scenery. The cabin looked even better than in the pictures, with a stone chimney, a wooden porch, and a swing. He knocked on the door and was greeted with a warm smile by a friendly old lady. "Well, hello, dear, you must be Benjamin. Well, I'm so glad you came. Please come in. I've made some tea for us," Mrs. Henderson said, inviting him inside. Benjamin followed her into the cabin, which was cozy and charming, with a fireplace, a sofa, kitchen, and a bedroom. He noticed no pictures on the walls, no personal belongings, nothing indicating that someone lived there. "So, Mrs. Henderson, why are you selling this place?" "It's absolutely beautiful," Benjamin asked, sipping his tea. "Oh, well, you know, dear, I'm getting old, and I can't take care of it anymore. My husband passed away a few years ago, and well, I have no children. I want to move to the city and be closer to my sister. She's been nagging me to do it for a long time," Mrs. Henderson said with a sigh. "I'm sorry to hear that, but you know, you are lucky to have a sister who cares about you. I'm an only child, and my parents are gone too. So that's kind of why I want to buy this cabin. I need a place to call my own, to relax and enjoy nature," Benjamin said, feeling a connection with the old lady. "Well, that's very sweet, dear. I'm sure you'll love it here. It's very peaceful and quiet. The only thing you must worry about is the wildlife. Some bears and wolves are around, so you must be careful. But don't worry, though. The cabin is sturdy and safe. Well, it's been in my family for generations. It's like a living thing, you know, has a personality of its own. And sometimes, sure, it creaks and groans, but that's just its way of talking to you. It's very loyal and protective of its owners. It'll never let anything harm you, Mrs. Henderson said, with a fond look in her eyes. Benjamin smiled, thinking that she must be sentimental. He finished his tea and said, "Well, Mrs. Henderson, I think I've seen enough. I absolutely love this cabin, and I would like to buy it. How much do you want for it?" Mrs. Henderson smiled back and said, "Well, dear, you don't have to pay me anything. Well, I'm giving it to you as a gift. Consider it my way of thanking you for being kind and respectful. All I ask is that you sign this paper. It's just a formality. It says that you accept the cabin as it is, with all its quirks and flaws, and that you will never try to sell or change it. Do you agree?" Benjamin was stunned by her generosity. He felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. He didn't care about the paper. He just wanted to own the cabin. He quickly signed it and handed it back to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You're very generous. Wow, I can't believe this is happening. I'm so happy," Benjamin said, hugging her. "Oh, you're welcome, dear. I'm happy too. You're the perfect owner for this cabin. It will love you as much as I do," Mrs. Henderson said, hugging him back. She let go of him and said, "Well, dear, I must go now. My sister is waiting for me in the city, and I packed my things, and I'm ready to leave. Well, you can stay here tonight and start your new life tomorrow. I hope you'll be very happy here. Goodbye, dear. Take care of yourself and the cabin." She grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door, leaving Benjamin alone in the cabin. He watched her go, feeling mixed emotions, but happy to have the cabin. Deciding to explore it more and make himself comfortable, he went to the bedroom and saw a large bed with a quilt. As he lay down on it, he felt a wave of relaxation, closing his eyes and drifting into sleep. Benjamin woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a strange sensation. He felt like he was being watched. He opened his eyes and saw glowing red eyes staring at him from the darkness as the door to the room slowly creaked open. He gasped and tried to get up, but he couldn't move. He felt something heavy on his chest, something that was crushing him. He looked down and saw that the quilt was alive. It had teeth and claws, and it bit and scratched him. He screamed in pain and terror, but no one heard him. He realized that the cabin was the monster. It had lured him in with its charm and then trapped him. It was feeding on him, slowly and painfully. He remembered Mrs. Henderson's words. It was loyal and protective of its owners. It would never let anything harm them. It would never let them go. He wished he had never signed that paper. He wished that he had never met Mrs. Henderson. He wished he had never seen the cabin, and he wished that he were dead. But then he woke up again. He was lying on the bed, covered with the quilt. He looked around and saw that everything was normal. The cabin was quiet and peaceful. He touched his chest and felt no pain or blood. He rubbed his eyes and wondered if it was all a dream, a horrible, vivid dream. He got up and went to the bathroom. He splashed water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. He saw no marks or scars on his skin. He sighed and tried to calm himself down, and he told himself that it was just a bad dream caused by his excitement or anxiety, and that the cabin was not a monster but a gift. Calming down, he returned to bed, pulled the quilt over him, and closed his eyes. As he tried to sleep, he felt a slight movement under the quilt. Then a faint sound was heard, like a growl, followed by a cold breath on his neck. He opened his eyes and saw the glowing red eyes again. Only this time he realized it was not a dream, for he wasn't asleep yet. It was real. It was happening. A wave of panic and dread washed over him. His heartbeat quickened, and his breath turned shallow and erratic. His mouth dried up, and his skin grew cold and clammy. Benjamin's muscles tensed and twitched as his mind raced with thoughts of helplessness. Though a solid urge to flee, fight, or do anything surged within him, he found himself immobilized. And in that moment, the realization hit him. He was destined for a slow and painful demise. He cursed himself for accepting Mrs. Henderson's offer without a second thought. Who gives away a cabin, especially one in the woods, no less, for free? He asked himself as he grappled with his fear. He screamed, but it was too late. The quilt wrapped around him, dragged him into the darkness. The cabin swallowed him whole. He was the cabin's owner and the cabin's prey. Ever since I can remember, I've always loved to hike. I grew up near the Jefferson National Forest and fell in love with the dense woodlands, countless swift rivers, and rolling hills. You could walk for miles without any signs of civilization. There's something special to me about discovering new places and exploring nature at your own pace. Eventually, I had to move away from the country to go to college. I was disappointed with the established hiking trails near my university, not because of the scenery, but because of the people. The city environment spoiled what made me passionate about my hobby. The once pristine trails from my memory were now littered with trash. People made too much noise and scared away the wildlife. These were not true hiking trails, but more exhibits of nature that were spoiled by convenience. I remember the first night I had the idea to go hiking after dark. Now at night, everyone left the parks and nature trails, and the night was much cooler than the 100-degree daytime summer heat. All it took was one trip, and I was hooked. Usually, I would go to the trail in the daytime and take a moment to scope out the park. My primary concern was avoiding the attention of the forestry wardens. Although there would probably be no serious consequences if I were caught, it added a small element of danger which made it more exciting. Up until this point, I'd been hiking 15 or 20 times, but what happened during this trip changed everything. I've not been able to bring myself to go back since. I'd been to the Devil's Gorge State Park a couple of times before, but had never had a chance to see it at night. The park is beautiful, as I'm sure anyone who had seen it would say. The main feature of the park is the ruins of an old turn-of-the-century mansion, constructed on a huge bluff overlooking Lake Crescent. The scenery consists of glades, meadows, natural bridges, sinkholes, and caves. Devil's Gorge, translated as Laughing Waters in reference to the gushing springs in the area. The park was well maintained and was crisscrossed with many trails, boardwalks, bridges, and outlooks. Here's some information on the park. The park is closed at sunset, so I had scoped out an area, mainly being concerned with a place to park that would not draw attention, and find an efficient way into the park after dark. I found the perfect spot about a quarter of a mile past an old nearby post office. Since I was not familiar with the area and had to walk through the forest, I had marked the trailhead on my GPS and grabbed the trail map during the daytime so I could easily locate it at night. I got out of my car and got my gear ready for the trip. I set my location on my GPS so that I would be able to locate my car at night without any problems. It was a little after midnight when I set out to find the trailhead. The night started off beautifully. It was a full moon that night, and it allowed plenty of light to see where I was stepping. I remember it was warmer than usual that night, but there was almost no wind at all, which was perfect. Less wind meant that I would be able to hear wildlife or forestry wardens before they saw me. After about 30 minutes, I found the trailhead easily enough and got started on my way. I continued to walk through the woodland and came upon a large clearing. Before entering the clearing, I paused for a moment to take a drink of water and to allow myself to become acquainted with the sounds of the night. I closed my eyes and listened to the crickets and the tree frogs, which echoed throughout the forest. After placing my water bottle back into my pack, I looked across the glade to see if I could spot any people or wildlife, but I didn't see anything. I paced slowly at first to warm up and to preserve my strength. The scenery went from an open meadow to scattered shrubs and became denser and denser until I was surrounded by dark forest. The moon showed through the trees and provided enough light to see without a flashlight. Stripes of moonlight that filtered through the tree limbs projected onto the path. I noticed a large rock on the side of the trail and took note of it as to not trip over it in the dark. As I got closer, it became clear what I was looking at. I turned on my flashlight, careful to keep the light low to the ground, and what I saw paralyzed me. It was a dead deer. Now, I've hunted a fair amount in my youth, which included skinning, field dressing, and butchering, so I had seen many in my lifetime. But I had never seen anything like this, and will always have a picture of it ingrained in my memory. It was a white-tailed buck, which was common to the area. It was about 200 pounds and had an 8-point rack. I've happened upon dead deer while hiking, which didn't make this too rare. If you don't get a good shot at a deer, it'll bolt, and if it's injured, It'll eventually bleed out and die, but get far enough so that the hunter will not find it. I've also seen deer which maybe a coyote or a stray dog may have run down and eaten. As soon as the light shone upon it, I felt something was wrong. The skin was missing. It was not unheard of to find a deer that something had been eating on, but the thing was, it didn't have the appearance of that. Its muscles, tendons, and bones were exposed from its hooves to the base of its skull and were untouched. Then I noticed something else. Its head was lopped around backwards. Something had snapped its neck. The eye, or where its eye should have been, was facing upward and was gone. I don't know how such a thing would happen, as obviously nothing in nature would do that. Someone would have to have shot or run down the buck and use enough force to yank the head of a large buck 180 degrees. I mean, why would somebody do this if the deer was already down for the count? Then there was its skin. I flicked my flashlight around and didn't see any fur, marks, or tracks other than footprints of the daytime hikers. When wild animals eat, they usually rip parts of the fur off, leaving a fairly large amount of fur scattered on the ground. No smell, no signs of rot, no flies or maggots. And most of all, this was a public trail, so things like this would be cleared in the daytime. So I wondered if it was still warm, but I really didn't like the idea of touching it. This was done very recently. Not wanting to stick around, I put my flashlight away and walked away. I really was not frightened at that point, but I was a little bit on edge. My senses were sharper. I stepped more closely, and with caution so I could hear well. In the distance, I heard the faint murmuring sound of the waters the park was named after. As I walked, the sound increased. The sound of the quick-running water coursing over rocks sounded like a soft whisper with a slight hint of snickering. I could not see the stream, but I knew it had to be close. It had been about 30 minutes since I had seen the deer, and I wanted to get my bearings. I opened my pack and took a drink of water. I retrieved the trail map I took from the forestry department during the daytime and compared it with my GPS location. There were no streams within a half mile. I stopped breathing and listened. I didn't hear anything. The sound of the water was gone, and for an instant I did become scared, but I did manage to calm myself. I rationalized it was probably the wind and not a stream. The sound of a steady wind through the dense forest could easily sound like running water. I was about halfway through the hike and following a trail loop which would bring me back near where I could get back to my car. I picked up the pace. The terrain became more rocky and rugged. The left side of the trail grew into a large cliff face, and the right side of the trail was a large drop. And this is when I first heard it. I stopped for a moment to listen harder and realized that it was coming from behind me. It sounded like a faint step on loose gravel and a dragging sound. Because of the bend in the trail and the cliff facing, I could not see anyone behind me, but knew that whatever it was very close. I remember thinking it was strange that I was able to hear something that faint when I noticed that there were no other sounds. I felt my skin prickle and my hair stand on end, and I was rooted into place with an unexplained feeling of fear. Fixed in place, I watched the trail behind me for a few moments and listened closely. Crunch, scrape, crunch. Scrape, throwing caution to the wind, I called out hello. But it stopped and everything went silent. I wanted to run. My body was teetering between fight and flight, but I was paralyzed with fear. My eyes were fixed on the path behind me, and I stared long enough that the edges of my vision grayed and tunneled. A slight breeze blew softly through the trees, which made a whispering sound. Was that the wind? I looked at the dense foliage around me, and nothing moved, although the sound still persisted. Did I get closer to a stream and not notice it? The sound was growing louder now, and it was coming for me. Crunch! My eyes darted back to the path behind me. There was something there. A shadowy form was hunched down over the trail. Its edges were blurred from the shadows of the trees. I would say it moved, but that is because that is the closest thing I can relate it to. It borrowed the neighboring shadows as its form raised up from the trail. A single eye reflected the moonlight in the center of its mass. The slight whispering sound increased sharply to a swell of gibberish chatter and a chorus of laughter. That was it, flee with flight feet or meet defeat. I ran faster than I had ever run before. Adrenaline pumped through my body as I dashed down the trail. I was not able to see the blazes marking the trails, but I knew I was both running away from it and towards my car. The trees around me blurred as I sprinted. The world around me became a distortion of moonlight and darkness. I ran until I could no longer ignore the sharp pain in my lower stomach and was completely out of breath. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and then tried my best to calm my breathing and to listen. I took out my GPS and I looked to see how close I was to my car. I had a little less than a mile, but I had to leave the trail to get back to where I had parked. I could still hear the murmuring in the night, but it was very slight, and that's all I needed. I kept the GPS in hand so I didn't have to stop and take it out, and I quickly jogged to the point I would exit the trail and have to go through the forest to get back. Moving through the forest was both slower and noisier. At about 100 feet from the trail, I chanced to look back. The eye was there, and it was looking at me. I could not tell if the trees were moving or if it was only their shadows. Darkness wavered and flowed around it, and it was coming. No longer caring about being heard or seen, I took off. I don't remember how I made it or how long it took. I vaguely remember the pain from running, but I didn't care. I got to my car, and I got the hell out of there. And I've never told anyone about it since. So Dr. Marcus Reed, the tall, graying psychiatrist, said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he walked beside his new colleague. I understand you've been briefed on our protocols, but let me take the liberty of reminding you once more. The seasoned doctor's white coat rustled as he gestured down the sterile hallway. This isn't just any psychiatric facility. We house the most dangerous criminals who have been declared legally insane. In this wing, I'll introduce you to our most fascinating patients, so you can understand exactly what you're dealing with and follow all safety precautions. These individuals don't comprehend their actions, and as they say among colleagues, there's no illness more terrifying than one that affects the mind. The serious, silent man only nodded in agreement, following his colleague. His sturdy frame was concealed beneath a coat buttoned to the top, while a high turtleneck covered his throat. Doctor. William Hayes opened the unlocked doors before the young specialist, and they entered a well-lit corridor painted white. On one side stretched a solid concrete wall, on the other, 4 locked cells, or rather, chambers. Each heavy door had a small observation window. They walked to the center of the corridor and stopped. Esteemed colleague, Hayes began, in cell number 1, we're observing a serial killer and cannibal. He firmly believes that consuming human flesh grants immortality. By eating human flesh, in his opinion, we absorb some mystical energy. He also tried to profit from this, turning his victims into canned meat and sausages, selling everything at the local farmer's market. According to him, he sought to do good by sharing immortality with unsuspecting people. We must be careful with him. He's already tried to bite several orderlies multiple times. And by the way, he's responsible for 8 victims. The young medic merely nodded in acknowledgement. Well, as they say, let's proceed in ascending order of severity. Cell number 2 houses a transvestite rapist who believes he's a woman, a prostitute who suffered sexual violence from truck drivers. They became his victims. He would prowl at night, searching for clients on the highway, then kill and rape truck drivers in that perverted sequence. They caught him after his 5th victim. The smiling psychiatrist glanced at the younger man and spoke more quietly. And what's interesting, he doesn't respond to his name Victor, only to Victoria. After this, the doctor pointed to the last cell and said, "In the 4th cell, we have an equally interesting case, the Skinner, also known as the Leather Man. This individual killed people and sewed clothing from them, sometimes stitching separate body parts to himself. Most interesting is that some parts he simply dug up from fresh graves. We've only been able to prove 3 murders so far, but there could be dozens more. Don't be fooled by his politeness. He's extremely dangerous." Dr. Marcus Reed looked at cell number 4 with curiosity, and then turned his gaze back to the senior psychiatrist. Dr. Hayes turned to cell number 3 and smiled mysteriously. But here, we have our most interesting specimen, not only because of his story, but also because of the number of victims. This patient killed 47 people in one night, including his own parents and fiancée, and did it in such a way that even I, a doctor with years of experience, get chills from the cruelty. So you fully understand who you're dealing with. We'll focus on him in detail. This will be a very interesting and unusual story. The old, rickety bus carried its few passengers along a broken dirt road, occasionally bouncing over potholes. Dust filled the bus like gray soup, and despite the open roof hatch, refused to leave. Jessica covered her upturned nose with her palm and turned to Michael with annoyance. "How much longer to your town? I can barely breathe," she asked. "Almost there," replied the stocky guy with a smile, looking out the window. "We're going to the turnoff, and then we'll catch a ride from there. Someone usually passes by." The slender, curly-haired blonde with ocean blue eyes muttered something unintelligible under her breath, and quietly continued looking ahead, watching the road. Mike hadn't been home for nearly 3 years since he left for college, and he missed it terribly, though he always found excuses: studies, work, summer jobs. But now, finally abandoning everything, he was returning to his hometown, even if just for a few days. Anticipating the reunion with his parents, he smiled as he looked at the golden wheat fields and nostalgically remembered his childhood. Soon the dusty bus stopped, and the young couple quickly jumped out for fresh air. Michael could hardly wait to see his family, while Jessica just wanted to leave this dusty furnace as quickly as possible. The bus finally gave them a cloud of dust and sped away, leaving the young people alone on the road in the middle of endless wheat fields. The girl suddenly remembered that the driver had somehow shaken his head and muttered something dissatisfied when he learned about the stop at this turnoff. but she hadn't paid much attention to it. If you ride around all day in such heat and dust, you'd start snapping at people too. Despite Michael's words about passing cars, there weren't none at all. They walked alone in the heat, while the guy tried to lift his girlfriend's spirits by describing in vivid colors all the beauty of the town and the kindness of its residents, especially praising his parents. Jessica would definitely like them, especially his mom, who would certainly feed them her delicious beef stew. No matter how long they walked, there were no cars. Water was running out, and city girl Jessica, unaccustomed to such hikes, slowly began to complain. Frankly, Michael was surprised by this turn of events, but didn't want to worry his beloved. A real man should always have everything under control, as his father taught him. Deciding to cheer up Jessica, he offered to carry her in his arms. But the girl grumbled dissatisfiedly, "Let's just walk faster. I'm all sticky and tired, and will run out of water soon." They walked to town for at least 4 hours, and had just approached the first yard when Michael's joyful smile instantly slid from his face. In 3 years, everything had changed dramatically. The once beautiful American town now looked more like scenes from a post-apocalyptic film, or a mystical settlement from the pages of Howard Phillips Lovecraft. They walked slowly through the town, and Michael didn't recognize it. The once bustling town could no longer boast the noise of people in the streets. There were almost none, and if someone was encountered, they hurried away on their business. The yards, overgrown with weeds, had no fences, and in the gardens, if anything grew, it was in small quantities among waist-high weeds. But the strangest thing the young man noticed was the absence of dogs. He never once heard the barking typical of small towns, nor the sounds of roosters or other livestock. One might think the town had died out, if not for the rare encounters with residents, who didn't seem eager for these meetings either. Finally reaching his house, Michael knocked on the door and noticed a strange detail, or rather, an object above the door. Tied with thick thread to the frame, hung a triangle woven from dry branches and wrapped with black ribbon. Michael took it in his hands to examine it more closely, and just then the door opened. His mother stood on the threshold. The young man hugged his mother and kissed her, then hugged her again. The woman responded reluctantly and somewhat tensely, mysteriously smiling as she invited the young people into the house. Michael looked at his mom and didn't recognize her. Always lively and neat, she now looked at least strange, terrible, and long unwashed black hair had stuck together in dirty clumps. Her skin was either white or gray-tinged, and instead of her usual bright dresses, the woman wore some dirty rags, a baggy, obviously several sizes too large gray sweater, and a long brown floor-length skirt. Even stranger, Mom wasn't wearing shoes. Her dirty feet could boast long, yellow nails with fungus. Michael wanted to turn on the lights, but Mom stopped him. "Son, we don't have electricity. It's not needed." They entered the house and were met by Robert Thompson, Michael's father. He had no less strange an appearance than his wife, the same pale skin color, the same untidiness in clothing, and the same bare feet with dirty, long yellow nails like Mowgli's. Instead of his usual blue sweatpants and white t-shirt, he now wore black, tattered and worn pants and the same brown shirt. All four sat at the table, not covered with a tablecloth. After brief inquiries about the young people's life and plans, Mom began telling how good life had become in town after the Grove mother came to them. She opened their eyes to everything and taught them to live anew, in union with nature and themselves. Most importantly, she brought them the truth. The atmosphere was tense, and it seemed that any moment the young people's nerves would snap, and they would rush back to the city, abandoning everything. Deciding to somehow maintain the dialogue, Michael carefully began questioning his mother. "Mom, why is there no electricity?" "Electricity is evil, so says the Grove mother," his father, who had been silent until that moment, joined the conversation. "A person should rise with the sun and lie down with it." "Everything's right, honey," said Margaret, extending her hand to her beloved. Turning to her husband, she slightly exposed her neck, and the young people saw a strange brown growth, more like tree bark. And when he squeezed his wife's hand, the couple noticed such growths on Robert's thumb. Michael and Jessica exchanged surprised and meaningful glances. "Mom," the young man inquired as carefully as possible, shamefully admitting, it seemed to him that a complete stranger was sitting in front of him. "Is nothing growing in your garden?" "Why?" "Why, Michael, of course it's growing," the woman said somewhat monotonously, not losing her smile. "You just didn't see it because of the grass, and you can't cut the grass, it hurts." The Grove mother would be displeased. And again Margaret began describing how good life had become after the Grove mother came to them. She also sometimes called her "she who knows" in conversation. After a long, tense conversation, the woman finally inquired if the young people wanted to eat, and receiving consent, hurried to the summer kitchen. Soon after her, the father also left. Michael completely didn't recognize his parents. Silence hung in the room. The young people, in complete shock, only exchanged meaningful glances, but had no desire to talk. In 10 minutes, 4 plates of vegetable soup and a large teapot of strong herbal tea already stood on the table without a tablecloth. "Mom, can I have some bread?" the young man inquired, after which the woman paused and, smiling, quietly said, "Son, there's no bread. Don't you know that it hurts wheat when it's harvested?" After these words, the young people's appetite disappeared completely. Everything was incredibly strange. Michael excused himself and went outside, and Jessica went with him. The young man looked at the bathhouse and noticed that the entrance to it was overgrown with grass, and the glass wasn't washed. The bathhouse hadn't been used for its purpose in a long time. The guy wanted to smoke, but as soon as he decided to strike his lighter, Margaret appeared as if from nowhere and stopped his hand. Jessica involuntarily shuddered. "Son, don't smoke. Fire is evil, so says she who knows." The guy put the cigarette back in the pack, and citing the fact that he hadn't walked around town in a long time, took Jessica's hand and left the yard. Moving a few meters from the house, the girl immediately began expressing outrage, suggesting they leave right now. But Michael stopped her and asked her to speak more quietly, especially since there would be no more buses today. He himself was in shock from what he'd seen. Everything had changed dramatically, and he didn't know why. Evening was approaching. They walked aimlessly around town, talking about various topics, but Michael noticed more and more oddities. On the doors of every house hung the same triangle of branches as at his parents' house. There were no children at all, and the few residents hurried home upon seeing strangers. There were still some animals. Black ravens sat on the roofs of houses, silently watching them with their gaze. But what Michael paid most attention to was the surveillance. The locals, though avoiding meetings with them, carefully watched their movements, mostly from windows, pulling back dirty curtains. The young man also noticed several times the same strange growths on the faces of the observers, exactly like those on his parents. Unnoticed by themselves, they came out on the road to the old sawmill, and the guy mysteriously smiled. To somehow lift his beloved spirits, he began telling how in childhood he and the boys used to run there to cause mischief. Everything there was managed by old Pete, or as they called him, Einstein. He built all sorts of devices himself, lighting equipment, conveyor belts, bird scarers, and even, according to him, assembled a generator. Honestly, they always thought he bought it somewhere and was fibbing to them. But the funniest thing was how he hid diesel fuel. "Come on, I'll show you." The girl was interested, and smiling, she agreed. For a city girl, life in a small town was a completely different world with its own mysteries and peculiarities. A wide, beaten path stretched in a winding serpentine into the distance, running between fields of weeds where golden wheat once grew. A warm wind, driving white clouds into the distance, played with their hair and ruffled their clothes. Without hints of rain, the red disk of the sun rolled toward the horizon, promising a quick sunset. The closer night became, the more uneasy Jessica felt. Something was constraining her, some bad premonition. She already regretted agreeing to the trip to this strange town, although essentially nothing terrible had happened. Just according to Mike's words, everyone seemed to have gone crazy at once. The couple approached the sawmill. Michael, without thinking for a second, continued on his way. The girl followed him. Around the corner, they were awaited by a homemade generator and a rusty container created by the local inventor, now forever forgotten and left without work. "Look, even the canister's still here," he said, smiling as he looked at the plastic container, addressing Jessica. Lifting the object with both hands, he shook it. There was a characteristic splashing sound. "Holy cow, there's still something left in there." "What is it?" the girl asked. The young man, stepping a few paces to the left of the noisy apparatus, sharply bent down, and with one movement pushed aside a sheet of metal. Behind it was a buried 200-liter barrel of fuel. He laughed like a little boy. "It's still here." He bent down and unscrewed the lid. Soon, like a thin black snake, a hose appeared. "This is how we used to siphon old Pete's diesel, and he never caught us once. He probably didn't even know. Damn, everything's exactly the same as it was." And here he looked mysteriously at Jessica. From this look, the girl felt uneasy and blushed involuntarily. The girl knew this look. Putting everything back as it was, Michael slowly walked to his beloved, and gently embracing her waist and pressing her to himself, spoke in an affected voice that seemed playful to him, and always made the girl laugh. "Jessica, do you want me to show you the stars? We could count them. More precisely, show you what the conveyor belt looks like inside." The girl, laughing loudly, turned away but immediately nodded in agreement. And the lovers, holding hands, hurried to the doors of the huge wooden barn. To Michael's surprise, the entrance was locked with a latch made of thick, massive timber. This hadn't been there before. As soon as the young man touched it, a hoarse voice sounded behind them. "What do you need here?" The girl involuntarily screamed, and turning around, she also shuddered. Michael likewise recoiled from what he saw. Before them stood a solidly built old man with a hood pulled over his head, though one could easily see how a strange brown growth had covered the entire right side of his face. We just wanted to look around. I grew up here, Michael muttered in confusion. There's nothing to see here. This is the Grove Mother's sanctuary. Only the chosen enter here. Go away before I raise the alarm and those who seek to know come. Not fully understanding what the old man was saying, the couple hurried back to Michael's parents' house. The young man looked back several times over his shoulder and noticed a strange peculiarity. The old man walked somehow unnaturally, as if taking each step with great effort. Gripping his beloved's hand tightly, Jessica quietly said, "Let's leave tomorrow. We'll definitely leave." They ate dinner in semi-darkness. On each of 4 plates lay stewed potatoes with meat of some tough bird. Only now did it dawn on the guy how his parents cooked food if they couldn't light fires, but he decided not to ask. Mike chewed the tough fibers, swallowed, and inquired of his mother, "Mom, what kind of meat is this? Quail or something?" "No, son, these are sparrows. These are birds of evil, they kill crops. And we devour evil and dissolve it within ourselves to overcome it." After these words, Jessica shot up from the table and, opening the door, ran behind the house. They could hear the girl vomiting. Michael managed to contain a similar attack. "This won't go down," he said, shaking his head, and stood up abruptly. Waiting for Jessica, he loudly declared, "I'm leaving for the city tomorrow and will only return when you come to your senses and become who you used to be." To everything said, the parents only smiled mysteriously. The young people lay in each other's arms, face to face on Michael's bed, without undressing. The sad girl stroked his hair. It was obvious she was close to tears. "As soon as we wake up tomorrow, we'll get out of here. I'll set the alarm for 8. The girl, closing her eyes, silently nodded. "Sorry, I didn't know it was all like this here. Honestly, I don't even know what happened and why my parents aren't themselves." "It's nothing," Jessica barely audibly said. "You couldn't have known." And she, kissing her beloved, quietly whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," and they fell asleep in each other's arms. Michael woke up, stretched, and felt full of energy. Jessica wasn't beside him. He looked at the wall clock, 11:35. He decided to check his phone, but it was also missing. Jessica couldn't have freaked out and left silently without him, especially taking his mobile phone. He quickly hurried to his parents and, meeting them, was slightly surprised. Mom, dressed in a clean blue dress, was ladling her famous beef stew into plates, while Dad, in a formal black suit and white shirt, was waiting at the table expectantly. Margaret smiled widely and said, "Son, sit at the table. Today we have a holiday dinner. This evening we'll introduce you to the Grove Mother." "We're actually leaving," the guy said uncertainly. "Have you seen Jessica?" "Yes, she left early this morning. She quietly left the house and went away. You sit down and eat, and then, if necessary, we'll look for your Jessica. Although I didn't like her right away. Dad and I think she's not right for you," the woman said. Michael believed his mom and sat at the table. Strange things had happened with Jessica before the emotional girl could leave quietly, or, offended by some trifle, not answer calls. The hearty stew turned out to be incredibly delicious, only the meat was somewhat sweet. Savoring the soup with appetite, Michael seemed to casually inquire, "Mom, what kind of meat is this? Not sparrows, I hope." The woman looked up from her plate and mysteriously said, "We didn't overcome evil yesterday." At that moment, his father fished out a bone with his fork and began greedily sucking on it. His pulse pounded in his temples, and his vision blurred. Michael dropped his spoon, seeing his father appetizingly gnawing Jessica's finger with its characteristic purple manicure. The guy's body went numb, and everything floated before his eyes. He almost lost consciousness, remaining in a mute trance from stress. He lost any strength to resist. He simply observed what was happening next. Everything was as if in fog. Mom persistently gave him strong herbal tea, monotonously talking and stroking his head. "Son, don't worry. She wasn't right for you anyway. The Grove Mother will bring you one of her daughters from the forest, good and fertile. And today we have a holiday. You'll become one who seeks to understand." Everything happened as if not to him, as if it were a terrible dream from which it was impossible to wake up. Throughout the day, Mom watched his every movement. Closer to evening, they dressed him in a black suit and white shirt, and tied a black ribbon on his left wrist. They also frequently gave him strong herbal tea with mint. As soon as it began to get dark, they led him to the ceremony. They led him surrounded by several dozen women who sang strange songs without words. Before entering the sanctuary, he glanced for a moment at the old generator. The large sawmill no longer had conveyor belts or grain compartments. It represented one immense hall with a throne woven from branches at the end. Everything took place in semi-darkness, and if not for the moonlight penetrating through huge holes in the roof, absolute darkness would have reigned. The entire town gathered for the ceremony, or rather, what remained of it after 3 years. Along the way, Mom told him they had overcome all evil and those who carried this evil. Michael understood how this victory had been achieved. People had simply been eaten. All the women dressed in long dresses, and the men in formal black suits with white shirts. But the unifying attribute for everyone was a black ribbon tied on the left wrist. Michael was brought to the center while they continued singing the strange, wordless song. Soon, silent ravens began landing on the roof. After half an hour of this ritual, the doors creaked open, and the Grove Mother revealed herself. Everyone fell silent. A tall, nearly 7-foot gaunt woman in a black robe. She walked slowly, and with each step, she unnaturally bent and cracked. Any movement was difficult for her. She moved and sounded like a living tree. The dark growths that were found to varying degrees in every town resident formed her skin. Absolutely white eyes looked more like ping-pong balls than organs of sight. Moreover, the creature couldn't close its mouth. Deprived of most of its teeth, it remained open all the time. She limped past Michael, and an unpleasant smell of damp earth and stale rot hit him. The creature sat on the throne of branches, and again the wordless songs began. After a short time, the mother stood and, baring herself to the waist, extended her bony hand forward. One of the elders, bowing his head, handed her a metal cup. The mother took it and, bringing it to her chest, began milking black liquid resembling tar into it, then extended this abomination toward Michael. Everyone fell to their knees and bowed their heads to the ground. Gentle hands touched the guy's back, and his mother's voice said, "Go, son, accept the gift." And the woman followed the example of the others. The creature had somehow managed to subjugate people, and they had formed a cult around her, confusing the monster with someone higher. The young man took several heavy steps toward the creature, but immediately turned sharply around and rushed for the exit. The bewildered worshippers began to rise to catch the fugitive, but they did so slowly and clumsily. When the guy was about to be outside, the same old man with growths on his face stood before him. But now without a hood. Michael recognized old Pete Einstein in him. After a second's delay, the young man struck the old man in the knee with all his might. He doubled over, howling in pain, and Michael pushed him inside the sawmill with the rest of them. In a few seconds, the young man slammed the doors shut and locked them with the heavy latch. Immediately, a hail of blows began. The trapped were trying to break down the doors, and Michael's mother was begging to let them out, at least her and his father, pressing on her son's feelings. As if enchanted in almost complete darkness, the young man ran around the corner of the sawmill and, finding the canister of diesel fuel, tore the black ribbon from his wrist. A blow, and the doors almost flew out. Another blow, and the crunch of dry wood was heard, while black ravens only watched everything happening, as if the wise birds didn't support either side. Without wasting a moment, Michael began pouring the diesel fuel, still trembling from the blows, on the gates. And when the fuel ran out, he took his lighter from his pocket and lit the black ribbon. Letting it catch fire, the man brought the flame to the gates and ignited the fire hated by the Grove mother. The doors began to be beaten even more fiercely, but everything was in vain. Michael left the town with tears in his eyes, under screams of pain, and in the light of the burning sawmill. They found him in an insane state as he wandered the road from town to the nearest settlement. He's now undergoing intensive treatment, but as you understand, esteemed colleague, this entire story was recorded from his words. What actually happened, we still don't know, but the investigation is working on it. The senior psychiatrist reported with an unchanging smile and calm tone. We also can't understand how he managed to lock all the residents in that sawmill. Moreover, remains of his fiancée were found in his digestive tract. We're inclined to think that the patient himself killed the girl, made soup from her, fed it to his parents, and then somehow burned all the town's residents. And of course, we can't believe his version, because as we know, monsters don't exist, much less living trees. Dr. Hayes, may I interrupt you? A young nurse interrupted the doctor's story while carefully looking at the newly arrived psychiatrist. Please come here. There's something unclear with Dr. Marcus Reed's documents, probably a mistake. Most likely, of course, Rebecca, the psychiatrist replied and headed toward the nurse, searching his pockets along the way and muttering to himself, "Where did I put the keys again? Did I really leave them on the table again?" As soon as the door closed and the newcomer was left alone in the corridor, he took the stolen cell keys from his pocket and, unbuttoning his collar, scratched the brown growth on his neck, more like tree bark. Looking at cell number 4, he approached the third, and unhurriedly opening the door, hoarsely and barely audibly said, "Time to pay, deserter." The next morning, 4 corpses were discovered at the psychiatric hospital for especially dangerous criminals. 3 were institution employees. The senior psychiatrist, nurse, and guard were found dead at their workplaces. The 4th cell was found unlocked, and the patient had disappeared. In cell number 3, they found the hanged corpse of a patient, and at his feet, a triangle woven from branches and wrapped with black ribbon. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.